Hello! Now, first things first, how's the sound? Am I loud enough? It's always a question I have to ask. It's always a question I have to think about. I'd also like to say, hello everyone. Now, I will leave my phone to an extent visible to me on one side, and there's a reason for this. The reason I'm leaving the phone visible to me to one side is, and not on mute but on vibrate, is because because Dan Boom Dan is on his way down here, and I haven't heard if he's reached his hotel yet. So if you hear a vibrating noise, that's my phone telling me he's arrived. You want something, don't you? Because you've begun to. How is it you know when I'm streaming, and you know that there are people in this world who will literally type PT, as Black Bear Maximus already has done, into the chat to say to give you a treat? How is it you have trained my channel to reward you with treats? How? How? There is no winning with you, is there? Absolutely no winning at all with you. Okay, right then, I'll get you some treats. Right, there we go. Oh, there are treats. Don't worry, the corgi's getting plenty of treats. There you go, you can have them there. Hello, everyone. How are you all doing? How goes the world you're all in, and are you having fun with it? I hope you are. Let's zoom in a bit. And move the camera a tad. And then update. And then make that a little bit wider. Because I don't mind if my shoulders are hidden. But I know you all enjoy seeing. Yes, the corgi has heard you, and as you can hear, is woofing from the background. They have way too much fun. They really do. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's video, which is on tiger cubs. Now, this is a rather interesting piece of alternate history, but it's also one of those pieces of alternate history which, honestly, you do wonder why the history didn't work out that way. And honestly, the only reason I could come up with was the government saving money. There's plenty of slip space for what I'm about to discuss available. There's plenty of arm production. There's whole yards. There's whole yards going bankrupt in this time period, especially there's the London one, for example, which could have built one of these ships. Okay, you don't want to give them a dreadnought? Give them a tiger cub. So yeah, there are lots of possibilities here which don't come about in history. So it's kind of interesting. And it's kind of fun to look at, because it's a lot of history to cover and think about. It looks like Dr. Clarke is also there. You wound me. You wound me. Audio is 8 out of 10. That's annoying, but we'll see what we can do. I am thinking that I might. It's going to sound terrible. It's all going to depend on how much the Historiathon raises, what exactly the money gets spent on. But I've been talking to people, and they keep telling me I should not bet against the fact that there will be people who will be intent on raising enough money that I have to watch the princess movie that we've discussed before. And therefore, if I'm going to do that, what am I spending that money on? Mostly it's going to be a kitchen. Okay, maybe a bedroom. Enhancement for more book space. But mostly it's going to be a kitchen. And then I might start doing some cooking videos as well, I have to admit. So the kitchen is not entirely just for me. It's just a case of I don't want to do any experimental cooking of naval stuff in a kitchen which isn't my own, and which will therefore not result in me getting, how do I put this, in trouble with everyone else and for mucking up their kitchen or monopolizing their kitchen. So there is a legitimate reason for it. But yes, today's video, today's topic, today's focus. Let's start off with HMS Tiger herself, because once you start talking about later Tiger Cubs, we have to think about her timeline. She is ordered 1911, laid down 1912, launched December 1913, commissioned 3rd of October 1914, decommissioned May 1931. She does have a fairly good history in terms of her activity. She is a useful ship, and she's a gorgeous ship. She's a really, really good ship, and why its name has not been italicized in the PowerPoint, I do not know, but I'm just going to fix that right now, because that's annoying me. It's ignoring me. It's annoying me. Yes, it is. What can I say? It annoys me. Hang on, the one in here is italicized, so has it just not updated the PNGs? When I was fixing things earlier. Is that being what it's done? Yay! Now it's all updated. Yeah, the Drac does nearly poison himself. I don't think I'm going to go quite that far. I was going to try and recreate some of the things, some of the menus from various important dinners through history. It'd be quite interesting to try and recreate the menu that Nelson and his captains ate in their meeting before Trafalgar, etc. It'd be quite interesting to do that sort of thing, and we'll see. But for that, I definitely do need my own kitchen. Oh, good lord. Watch Princess Bride. Yeah. Trust me, I've been working out what figure... one of the things I have to say with it I did do is I've done the maths on working out exactly how much needs to be raised, how the money translates through the YouTube system, and what gets deducted and what I need to raise. It's fun. Drac seems to nearly or actually poison himself somewhat regularly. We'll leave that to one side and get on with this video, but there is going to be a video coming up with me and Drac soon. So, HMS Tiger's timeline. Now, she's got 13.5-inch guns, but the important thing to think about her is, apart from being a very sexy ship and a very powerful-looking ship, she's also firmly a battle cruiser, one word. Now, I've discussed this in many videos, and I'm going to discuss this again. The evolution of the spectrum, the capital ship spectrum, goes from battle cruiser, two words, which are basically as close to a cruiser as you can get, but they still have, capital ship grade gunnery, armor, gunnery ship grade guns, and their armor might be as thick as it is on a battleship, but it certainly won't have the same area of coverage. Then you've got battle cruiser, which will have more coverage, more subdivision than a battle cruiser, because it's designed to fight other battle cruisers. And as you go up, and so therefore would be theoretically is slightly slower than a pound-for-pound battle cruiser, as in the pure closest to the cruiser. Then you have fast battleship, and then you have full battleship, dreadnought battleship. And as you go along, they basically exchange speed for armor coverage and subdivision. Not necessarily armor thickness, because armor thickness often depends on the generation and the role. So for battle cruisers, as in two words, yes, armor thickness will be expected to be thin. We'll be expecting to see 6 inches or sort of that sort of level of armor, i.e. enough for dealing with cruiser guns, but not equivalent guns. Once you get onto battle cruiser, one words, they'll have equivalents in armor, but they will have more subdivision and more armor coverage than a battlecruiser, but they won't have as much as a fast battleship, and they certainly won't have as much as a battleship. And that's one of the things also when people start going, this has the same thickness of armor as this. Yes, but covering how much of the hull, darling? That's usually the question which I go for, and it's usually the point at which people go, well, yeah. When you're trying to make the case, a fast battleship will have its coverage will be more likely to be it might have the more of a thickness, the capital ship with sort of the thickness covering more of a wider area. It's got more subdivision to support that armor to provide it with better resilience if it does get hit and the armor does break through the armor. It's all these things, but it exchanges all that for speed. So basically, it's losing speed that it could get to have that coverage. So in the case of Tiger, she's firmly battlecruiser, one word. But the interesting thing at that point is there are now issues. There are issues coming up, and there are issues which the Royal Navy is having to deal with that actually start to make this make sense. Because if we consider the ship we're going to be talking about in terms of a Tiger Cub and based on design, I was thinking between 6 and 8 9.2 inch guns. They could go sort of renowned style 6 gun arrangement, or they could go for a 4 twin arrangement as a la the lovely Tiger, and probably would do the 8 9.2 inch gun arrangement. The reason I say 6 is because when I was trying to put together a design on UAD, I could only get a 6 gun arrangement. That would work. And give me the desired speed of 28 knots, which is what they'd be aiming for, because it's got to match Tiger's speed. And within the sort of the right tonnage limitations, 4-inch secondaries, and interesting if I thought they might try some small tube boilers. I also thought they'd be laid down in batches of 4, as cruiser classes often were. And so you'd have 4 laid down in 1912, 4 in 1913, and another 4 laid down in 1914. Decommissioned in 1914, 1915, and 1916. So it makes sense. But why is this all making sense? Why can I make this case quite serious in this time period? Well, the rising cost of battlecruisers, and HMS Tiger was definitely expensive, had eroded the idea that the battlecruisers were going to take over the armor cruisers' role as being station flagships. And also eroded them providing any kind of mass for their role. That's a problem. Especially for the Royal Navy, you need mass for your role. We're not talking about the treaty area, we're talking about the pre-treaty area, where the Royal Navy relies a lot on mass to make for sure it's places else everywhere in the world. And yes, it has been getting rid of quite a lot of mass to fund the creation of the dreadnought program and various other things, as a way of giving a sop to governments. And that's probably why these ships actually don't get built when they're needed. But the thing is, they're having those discussions. And in fact, the large light cruiser, or station cruiser, was not just needed, and they realised this, it was needed, it made even more necessary by the concentration of assets in Europe for the situation vis-a-vis Germany. So basically, the more you have to concentrate in Europe, the more you have to concentrate your heavy units in Europe, the more you need units like a station cruiser to be your representative abroad, so that you can, in many ways, spread your battle cruisers and your larger ships more thinly. They can turn up less often because there's another level of escalation in your deterrence arsenal in that local area. And let's be honest, something with 8 9.2 inch guns is going to have more than enough firepower to deal with the vast majority of the world. Especially it's from the Royal Navy. Because, this has got 8 9.2 inch guns, so you've got to send one of your battleships to deal with one of your far larger ships. And if you do that, and it starts a fight, then you're going to end up with a war with the Royal Navy, and they've got a lot more big ships than you have, so it's best to have a negotiation at this point. It's reached that point. And what's interesting about this discussion, the reality of this discussion, is it's this discussion which Jackie Fisher highlights, and hijacks, really, to get Courageous, Glorious, and Furious built. That's what he's justifying. He's justifying those ships through that discussion, but he's trying to turn them into battle cruisers by the back door in many ways, by giving them capital ship grade guns. Whereas I've said many times, they'd have actually made far more sense with 9.2-inch guns. They'd have made far more sense. You could have fitted 4 twin turrets on them quite easily, and they would have been absolutely exceptional ships in that role. And they'd have been really useful. Now, Jellicoe was also, of course, looking for ships to trial small tube boilers. And he's in 3rd Sea Lord, October 1908 to May 1910. Again, I've had a typo. Oh, good lord. I think I've had a typo. I do not know what's going on with this one today. I've been dealing with a lot of lawyers and builders today, so it's been one of those fun days, but I still do not know why I didn't notice the typos when I did my last flick through today. Ay, caramba. The thing is, it's good enough when you know. It's good when you know the history well enough to recognize when it's a typo and not just repeated out of ad infinitum. Now, this means that justifying a class of these ships, a class of them, that could be basically fill many roles. They could, in some regards, repeat the role of the armoured cruiser before HMS Dreadnought, a way to produce useful ships that could test out technology, but not be so big and expensive as to require the full cost of a capital ship layout. So you chest your small tube boilers on them. They would fill the capital, what they're calling station cruiser or large light cruiser role, or I have a feeling the role which they seem to be quite liking the idea was station cruiser. And I think that's an interesting idea to come with, but there's also large light cruiser as a concept going on around. But I think the Royal Navy's not going to like the idea of having a large light cruiser, because that sounds oxymoronic. You have a light cruiser, and you have something which designates a large light cruiser. It's both large and light. That sounds wrong. But it's also not going to be a heavy cruiser, because, let's be honest, in a world where the battle cruiser exists, this is not heavy. It's not, is it? This is one of the reasons why I hate the heavy cruiser terminology, because in a world with battle cruisers, how in the world is the 10,000-ton 8-inch gun ship a heavy cruiser? There are battle cruisers. Surely the heaviest cruiser should be called the heavy cruiser. And if there's a 42,000-ton battle cruiser going around the world, you are not the heavy cruiser. So, yeah. This is a scenario you have to think about. This is a scenario they have to think about. So, yes. 6 to 8 9.2-inch guns, 4-inch secondaries, 21-inch torpedoes. This is going to be a viable ship, and it's going to be a useful ship that can fulfill a very sensible role. And again, I refer to you to the fact that this is kind of some obvious thinking, because it's coming straight out of the Royal Navy's historic playbook. So the question becomes, why aren't they doing this in this period? You can even argue earlier with Queen Mary and Lion and Princess Royal. You know, those ships, they are all powerful ships, but they are definitely on the battle cruiser part of the spectrum. They are far more expensive than the Invincibles and Indefatigables were. Far more expensive. And you've got this gap starting to appear. Now, you can make the case, well, the Royal Navy still had a lot of armoured cruisers in service. True. You can make the case that they are trying to save as much money as they can, because governments don't want to spend any more money than they have to. Very true. And ultimately, I think that's the one which wins. But that's literally the case. Even in a time period when the Royal Navy is the world's largest navy, the one which has the most successful funding operation, which literally has such a good funding operation, it sometimes gets more ships than even it wants. Remember the famous We Want 8 campaign? Where the Royal Navy asked for six, the Treasury wanted two. They agreed on four, and four later, if the situation got worse, and then they ended up giving them 8. It's a terrible situation for the Royal Navy to be in. So realistically, getting 4 of these ships should not have been that difficult. Thames Iron Works has already been discussed and mentioned. There are a few others. Literal yards, which are massive yards, capable of building battleships, that are going bankrupt because they don't have enough orders in this time period. Quite literally, yards going bankrupt, eve of World War I, because they do not have enough orders to fill themselves up. Definitely some spare capacity. Michael Coach. You see, would the first 4 have 2 with small tube boilers and 2 with normal boilers to give a comparison and de-risk moving to new tech? Interesting enough, I doubt that. Whilst the Royal Navy did try different forms of electricity on the Daring-class destroyers post-World War II, pre-World War II, pre-World War I especially, I think they've got enough knowledge of the regular boilers and enough understanding of them that they're not really going to consider this a high-risk new tech. If these ships fail, they're station cruisers. It's worth saying. If they don't achieve 28 knots, if they're not, then it doesn't really matter because they're going to be the station vessels pootling around for most of the time period, is what the Royal Navy is going to think. So it's kind of a de-risk strategy to begin with. There's also a different level of risk you're prepared to take with a cruiser build versus a battleship build. And I think they probably just go all 4 of them. And yes, I could see Australia buying some. I could see other nations buying them in terms of Britain and its empire. I could see them being very useful. But I could also see them having an impact on some of the wider world. Don't think America would build any. I'm not sure about France. I don't know if they have the capacity to build anything, especially considering how big their dreadnought program is becoming at this point. Italy, again, is doubtful, and Germany, well, they've already got the Blucher. I don't know if they'd actually go for this as well. There was actually someone who wrote a phrase that it was in time for a dreadnought-like cruiser. And that's what this would have been. This is the other thing this could have been called, a dreadnought-like cruiser, a DLC. I don't think that works again. I really don't. But there is going to be some point in the German Navy going, "Ha! We got the Blucher first!" And the Royal Navy going, "No, we'll get to this, though. We'll get to this." But it would be kind of an interesting factor in that the Germans will have technically built what will be this definition for the ship before the Royal Navy. Although the Royal Navy's one is bigger and more powerful. 28 knots is the big advantage. And again, small tube boilers do allow for that. They do allow for that. So, Trolls, Battles and Darings, shameless book plug. Well, I usually use this for a few announcements as well, and I've got a Historiathon coming up at the end of November. That's going to be advertised soon, along with what people get for donating and what the money goes towards in various things. I have to say I haven't promised any money to charity or anything this year because, frankly, I've just moved house and the way everything's been going, I don't know how it's going to do, whether it's going to do well or whether it's going to do badly. I don't want to make any promises I can't deliver to a charity. But if it does do well, if a Historiathon does do well, I might use it again as a thing of every Christmas season where I start the Christmas period where I put out all the videos I can. Over the Christmas period, I will do a Historiathon and I will split the proceeds between myself and a charity. with various things I'm aiming for and various things for a charity. But I'm very much going to see how it is, because whilst I realise there are donathons, donathons are quite a normal thing on YouTube in various things now, in various parts of the YouTubing community. I don't think anyone's done a historiathon before. I don't think anyone's done it in the educational content creator space, and I just don't know how it's going to go. And I'm doing it in a way because I've been honest with you, I've been racking my brains for a way to fund getting pictures for the books, so I can get the books free 45,000 word books published, and get them sorted out. And I need to buy the picture rights for them, and for that I need to raise money. I need to either earn the money or I need to find some way to raise the money. So that's what I thought a historiathon was for. And I've added in a few other things as stretch goals, because the most important thing for me is to get the books sorted out. But I've added in things like, well, if I raise this much money, I will get a new laptop, because I need one of those. I've started to kill off the laptop, and that means I don't really have a backup if anything happens to the PC. Whereas I like to have a laptop which can be serviced back up to the PC if that goes down, and vice versa, basically, as well as being a good thing for travelling around, recording and going live streaming from around the world when I'm moving around. And as said, I've added in a joke of, well, if you all keep talking about, I should watch The Princess Bride, well, I'll watch it, but in the nicest way, that's going to fund my kitchen. I spec'd out a kitchen in IKEA, not the most expensive options in there, but actually fairly decent ones to go with the Calyx collection, and yeah, that's the policy. And I've also got to, by the way, find a way to fix these monitors. I've got to get them. I'm gonna have to get a new monitor stand, I think, because the monitors don't seem to be able to get a level position here at all. So if I get a monitor stand which stands on the floor and supports both of them, that'll probably help things. But there's a few things like that. And all this is possible to do because you've been kindly buying my book. You've been kindly supporting this channel, supporting its growth. You're doing Patreon. Patreon is currently open. And again, Patreon, we're doing something slightly different this time, because I'm combining the suggestions for December and January. So suggestions all coming in now. I will put 25 of those up for a vote, and so basically suggestions are open, and then 25 of those, because that's the maximum Patreon will allow, will go to vote. I will also make that the first one, the first vote, which is not just open to members. Members are automatically able to vote in it, but if you want to pay some money for a one-off fee, you'll also be able to go vote even if you don't want to be a member of Patreon. So you can go and vote. And it's going to be a case of the top 4 will be the 2 lives for December and January, and the next 4, basically 5 through to 8, will be made into premieres. So that means the top 8 out of 25 will get made into videos over a December and January period. So I thought that should be something which is, I hope, liked. The reason I've done that is because, if I'm being honest, I want to be able to run February's votes, February's sort of suggestions and votes in December, but I want time between now, because I know how many videos I'm going to have to make and how many videos I'm going to have to do between now and January. I want as much time as I can to do the necessary research and prep them all. So, and to basically be able to do them at my own pace whilst I'm still getting over recovery. It'll be a couple of months. The doctors reckon I'm on track, but it'll be a couple of months before I'm back to my normal health. So I probably will be about my birthday. I'm back to my normal health in March. So yeah. It'll be fun. It'll be fun. But anyway, that's basically what's coming up as a bit of an update. Could also see Australia by some. But anyway, let's get back to today's topic. So, with these wonderful ships available, what's their impact going to be? Well, there's actually an interesting question in the chat already. Are you sure Tillman doesn't look at these and go, hey, the Pen and Tens could don't match these. Let's build a couple or 4 foot in Charleston. He might do. Honestly, he might do. It might give a whole new meaning to Tillman because he might look at these under construction and go, yes, I can build these in Charleston if we expand the yard. I don't know. It's going to be an interesting thing to do. It would be definitely an interesting thing to see what he would do, because Tillman is kind of like that. He's sort of, he's, as I've said before, I don't personally like his politics, but you have to understand the man is obsessed with one thing and one thing only, and that's getting re-elected and being as powerful in Charleston as physically possible. And that's all he really cares about. And as such, that's what he have to think about it for. He gets ships, he wants ships built there to get to do that. Colin Cameron, so it would be the same as when the French built the first ironclad, then the Iron just outbuilt them. Pretty much, that's if the Blucher would have been built, and then everyone laughed at the Blucher, but yeah, now the British should be just building just basically what the Blucher was. Don't need a kitchen to make homebrew. Well, I don't drink alcohol. I just drink iron brew. But leaving that to one side, I don't actually have a bath to my name. The baths are all in that side of the house. Currently, so are all the showers. Are all in that side of the property. My annex, I've got to build the shower unit upstairs. I've got to build the whole extension of my bathroom of my bedroom, and a bathroom which will hopefully have a bath over a garage which hasn't been built yet. That's going to be built there, and I'm going to build my kitchen. So I've got my annex space, which has literally got a toilet. It's got this downstairs office space, which is 2/3 occupied by stuff for the family and the rest of the building, and it's got the 2 rooms upstairs, which are a bedroom and what's going to be my lounge/spare bedroom. So yeah, it's lovely, but it needs work, and I need to do this stuff, and that's what I'm doing. Hello, Princess Tonka. Don't know if I didn't, but I kind of say I bought it because it's good. That's kind of to say. Can see Clarke adding an As You Wish show once a month. Yeah. Might do that. You cannot escape the fleet. Hello, Foo. So, Travis Perkins, I will consider it, but first I've got to actually knock through and set it up. Okay, no, that's all fun. Richard Guts, depends on the bot specs they are. If they're markedly cheaper, fast enough to outrun battlecruisers, if need to, with enough armor, they could be useful. Otherwise, might as well build more battlecruisers. Actually, yes and no. Because the thing is, Cuts, Richard, you have to remember that this is also about peacetime deterrence and peacetime mission. This is about the peacetime role of the Royal Navy in terms of its deterrence and global presence. So consider them sort of things which are adjuncts to your cruiser force and adjuncts to your battle cruiser force in wartime, but in peacetime are probably your global presence ships, your station ships. And that's very much what the Royal Navy is considering, because the battle cruisers are getting so much more expensive. They would be markedly cheaper. And aiming them for 28 knots means they're able to do battlecruiser speed. Sorry to hear that, Knight. I hope your mum gets better soon. Hi, Jack Ray. Hello, Paul Amos. Hello, everyone who's been here, by the way. Fame, I haven't said hello. I'm sorry. Right. So, here is their impact pre-war. If you have these ships built, well, the thing is, pre-war, they're mostly under construction. They're not going to probably be in service much before Tiger would be in October 1914. In fact, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if they are around October 1914, so that's the date I've used. I've basically suggested, mentally gone, they will be laid down a month either side of Tiger. So they're going to be available between September and November 1914. And the SMS Blucher, doesn't seem such a bad idea in this scenario. Sorry, cat. However, they have a top speed. Blucher has a top speed of 25.4 knots, which means she's slow. She's slow with the battle cruisers. She's slow with the cruisers. Raleigh! Calm down. Who are you telling off? Hey, what's up? Oh, thank you, Karen. Thank you, my sister. Back you go. No, woofing at the Tesco's delivery man is not going to get you food any faster. Next time we challenge you to a woofing match in a parking lot. Not happening. We've been over this before. Tesco's man is nice. He's delivering food. Woofing at him like that does not speed it up. Okay? Sorry, I thought it was the cat. It's actually the Tesco's delivery. It's actually early. They were supposed to be here about 10 o'clock tonight. Ah, well. I need a kitten to keep the dogs under control. They're sort of under control. So, where was it? Ah, yes, the Blucher. Unfortunately, she's 25.4 knots, so she's not fast. She's got 12 8.3-inch guns, which means she does technically have more. She's going to technically have more than these ships would. You know, they have 8 9.2-inch guns. But the thing is, with her layout of her guns, she has a broadside of 8. So, because she has 4 wing turrets, she realistically... Raleigh! Stop it! Realistically, is about the same firepower. In fact, less when you consider the 9.2-inch shells considerably outweigh the 8.3-inch shells. And therefore, actually, in terms of fighting capability, she's at a massive disadvantage. Add on to this the fact that they have a commanding speed advantage. Okay, it's not the full 3 knots that's preferred, as I discussed before, but 2.6 knots. And remember, they're going to have newer engines, newer boilers, and they're probably going to be oil-fired. Well, they're likely to be oil-fired as a way of testing out before you order the Queen Elizabeth. This is the thing is, the impacts they could have could be massive. I'd also say, if you have ordered these ships as small tube boiler ships, and the Royal Navy is happy with the small tube boilers, if the Royal Navy is happy with the small tube boilers in terms of their construction testing as they're building them, then that means the Queen Elizabeth class might well be small tube boiler ships. And that could well up their speed to... I've discussed it before. Let me put it this way. With some design changes, if small tube boilers work with some design changes, it's very possible to achieve 28 knots with the Queen Elizabeth class. Okay? A slight lengthening of the hull. Raleigh! Raleigh! Excuse me. Stop it. No more. It's not necessary. Thank you. With a slight lengthening of the hull and some other small modifications to design, if you were using small tube boilers, you could get 28 knots out of the Queen Elizabeth class. So, in the scenario where we're talking about, in the scenario where we are, these ships would have been laid down before the Queen Elizabeth class. So that means the small tube boilers are not just under consideration, are being tested and are going through, which makes it possible that the Queen Elizabeth and even potentially ours are all small tube boiler ships, which is going to speed them up. My doorbell does bark well. Yes, my doorbell does bark well. It's not helped by the fact that my sister is walking backwards and forwards in front of him outside talking to the Tesco's delivery man. And that the Tesco delivery man brings someone's chicken. Now, I would say under this scenario, these ships aren't going to enter service before World War I begins. And World War I begins in August 1914. So these ships are not entering service before Tiger. Maybe a month earlier, but, you know, it's going to be spread out. So we really don't have to think about them in the terms of the initial war phases. So that means probably the pursuit of the Goeben is out as a scenario which they're going to get in. But, and I really cannot stress this, I think the impact pre-war is going to be mostly in terms of technology on the Royal Navy. I don't think they'll have that much of an impact in terms of what other navies are building, because most of them have maxed out their infrastructure. If you look at France, there certainly aren't major yards going bankrupt there. The same in Germany, the same in Italy, the same in America at this point with what they're building. It's only Britain that has major yards, which are battleship yards that could build battleships, going bankrupt. And we talk about Thames Ironworks, but there are others as well. Again! Excuse me. You're very cute. Hey, come here. Come here. Come here. Come here. Come here. You're very cute, but stop it. Stop it. Good boy. Now, this is going to be the interesting thing, because again, if you're building these ships, and technology-wise, and if they've achieved the right length to beam ratio, again, you're going to make ships, you're going to find out if you can make the ships longer. They are in many ways going to be, to an extent, close to the battle cruisers, but also close to the fast battleship concept, because they are probably going to be designed with slightly more subdivision than a cruiser of their size normally would have been in traditional Royal Navy parlance. And the other point you have going on is that, you know, these factors are going to affect things. So this is one of the reasons why I say I think the Queen Elizabeth class could end up being 28-knot ships, and I wouldn't be surprised if the R's end up being about 25-knot ships. Maybe even they can keep with the 28 knots. It's going to depend on how the small tube boiler designs work out. Because, honestly, once you look at the cost differential for the R's and the Queen Elizabeths, the Queens aren't that much more expensive than the R's. They really aren't. And you don't have a good... the R's are in many ways 15-inch gun armed versions with improved armour layouts of the King George V's, which come before the Queen Elizabeths. But the thing is, again, you have a compelling reason now to make changes with small tube boilers if they're working. And the reason I use the Tiger Cubs for the small tube boilers is because that's an interesting area where the power density could be really useful, getting these ships up to 28 knots. Getting a cruiser-sized hull, a large cruiser-sized hull, up to 28 knots. They could be very useful. So what do I think they would be cutting their teeth on? Well, honestly, I would say that if they're coming into service in October 1914, and considering what's just happened in terms of the Goeben and Breslau getting away, well, I would say I think the space you'd find a pair of them ending up is going to be Craddock Squadron. I really do think it's an obvious place for them to be sent, because they're going to be fast enough to get down there. You're not sending away battle cruisers, which are important for the North Sea. You're not sending away things which are important for the operations you're worried about. But they're big enough ships, they're going to make a very quick difference. And it's a very easy reinforcement. They're also fast enough to get down there in time. So, yes, they might have come into service before the war, but it's going to be doubtful. Again, I'm giving them roughly 2 years from their construction, a little bit, roughly a bit over 2 years. That does make sense, roughly what we're talking about. To go from, and it's not just construction we have to talk about, it's commission. And you have to remember, again, with the Royal Navy, they do a lot of testing before they commission a ship. So they test it before, because if they could test it before it's commissioned, they don't pay the bill, the yards does. So the Royal Navy doesn't commission a ship until they're satisfied with it. This is the reverse of what you find on the German side, etc., where they commission ships as soon as possible so they can raise their fleet numbers as quickly as possible. But that means that if there's any problems found the other side of commissioning, technically they're the owners and it's buyer beware. So if you've got 4 coming into service, I think a couple going down to Craddock's squadron, even 1 going down to Craddock's squadron is going to make a difference. But if you've got, I think probably a pair. And maybe 1 to back up the battle cruiser, which is sitting in the Caribbean as watch and backstop. You could quite easily do that. You could quite easily send them around like this. And that then creates a massive problem because for the Germans, because Scharnhorst and Eisenhower are good. Again, they are good ships. They are really good ships. They are the class which precedes the Blucher in construction, so they're not that old. They have a nice layout with those lovely 8.3-inch guns again. And they have again an 8-gun broadside. So they've got good firepower. But they've got a top speed of 22.5 knots. So they are massively outclassed in speed terminologies. Basically, these two, the Tiger Cubs, or as I've mentally in my mind christened them, the Galatea class, because that's what UAD gave me as name and I felt it fit. They're going to be running around them, giving them an absolute headache. They are. And they've got enough 9.2-inch guns that, frankly, the squadron, Craddock's squadron is going to be have an overwhelming firepower advantage. Now, is this the same as a battlecruiser turning up? Not quite, because that would literally could solo the entirety of Von Spey's squadron. If HMS Australia or even HMS Invincible was there, they could pretty much solo the entire squadron. But with Craddock's squadron having these 2 ships, Von Spey can't really get away from them. They can outrun pretty much everything in his squadron. Anything that they can't outrun, Glasgow can. And on top of that, they can't fight anything he has. Now, I think this changes the Battle of Coronel, because if they do run into each other, as they historically did, at this point, the British force, whilst not universally having a speed advantage, enough of the vessels do have a speed advantage that they can set the range. You might argue, well, yeah, the Germans could set the range and could keep up with Monmouth and Good Hope, and they could box them in. They could try that, but every time they could try that, these 2 ships could basically go, hello. And so it's going to be... I wouldn't be surprised also if Craddock transfers his flag to one of them, because that would make sense. He's going to be his fastest, most powerful ship. It's a sensible one to be in, and I wouldn't be surprised if what you see is the British force forms roughly 2 loose squadrons. A squadron under the captain probably of Monmouth, with Good Hope and Otranto together in that group, and Glasgow and the 2 Tiger Cubs together in the first and lead group. And basically, it's going to be a case of, if Scharnhorst and Eisenhower try and give fight, they're going to have to take on both groups. If they try and run, they're going to be harassed and harried by the first group. And with their firepower, with the range of their firepower, they're going to win that fight. Now, the interesting thing to me is, if they do win that fight, is it's going to make it far more difficult to try and cancel them, in terms of for Fisher when he gets into his position. But most importantly, it's probably going to have an impact on the whole idea of the Courageous class. Because they've just proved themselves. They've just shown themselves to be of value. They've shown themselves to be of capability. And you've got another 2 batches coming through. They're useful to build. They are cheaper to build and crew than a battleship or battlecruiser. So if you finish these ships off, they're useful. and you can have them supporting operations around the world. They could be useful supporting. Let's put it this way. Whilst one of these, probably solo against Goban, might have trouble. If you had a couple of them sitting, along with the Lord Nelson, sitting in the Mediterranean, they're going to firmly make sure Goban doesn't get out. So if Goban and Breslau try to do what they did historically, which is go out when the Lord Nelsons were busy elsewhere, and could run in and attack the monitors and various other things, cause damage, and then run back up the straits, they wouldn't be able to do this in this scenario, because they'd have these things going, hello! Hello! Did you call our names? Yes, you've got bigger guns than us, but there's a couple of us, and we're going to be fast and nasty to you. So they're very useful. There's also the fact of, if you're talking about the Baltic plan, okay, the idea to going into the Baltic and forcing the Baltic. Well, we need, lighter draft capital ships to go into the Baltic, to go across and do this operation. Well, can you really justify that when you've got these ships in construction? Because they've got enough firepower that the only thing that's really going to deal them is a capital ship. So your whole reason for getting the Courageous, Glorious, and Furious goes out the window. They're no longer necessary on that front. There is even the argument that it might affect the renowns being changed, because do you need to rush through the renowns? Because you've got these ships coming in service, and they're they're fast enough, but the renowns will be a lot faster, so you might well still get the renowns. But there again, what design are they building on? Because how has the R-class design evolved and changed? All these things have to be considered. I think Badenburg would still fall as he historically did, but as I said, my big thing is I'm fairly certain that Fisher wouldn't cancel these. He wouldn't get they would be considered too useful and too sensible. And Fisher would also not get to build the Courageous class because of them. Because, frankly, they're powerful. Now, that's going to have some long-term changes for all sorts of history fun, but we'll see that. We'll see that as time goes on. So it's Craddock hunting speed this time. Would he leave some of the slow ships to Canopus? No, as I said, I think they split up into 2 groups. But Craddock would be hunting today. Good boy. By the way, I think I might have a reason why this lovely chair always seems to creak. People keep saying you need a new chair, and I do probably need a second chair in here. I only have one, but I was going to save all that till I've got space and I can work out whether I can get where I put a sofa and what chairs I should get in here. But the other reason it probably creaks is because every time I try and oil it and sort out, someone, and I'm not naming names or pointing them, seems to try and lick the oil and all the stuff away. Now, admittedly, I do use lubricant which is dog safe, because I've had that experience in the past with a Cocker Spaniel who managed to make themselves very ill thanks to it. So I get lubricant which is dog safe. So if they do eat it, it doesn't make them too bad. But still, that's the problem of probably why this keeps squeaking. HMS Atlanta, HMS Nimrod, HMS Achilles, HMS Perseus. There's going to be all sorts of names. Again, if there's 12 of them. And again, I've put in 12, but let's say the Australians order a pair at some point in that. There could be 14, 15, 16 of them. If they've ordered a pair, maybe Canada's ordered some. So the thing is, there's going to be a lot of these ships around, and they're going to be useful ships. They're in the I would say they're in the 12 to 15,000 tons range for at least the first two batches, but I wouldn't be surprised if the third batch is the 15 to 18,000 ton range. And they're capable. Right, now let's go quickly through the chat and see what questions there are. Michael Cooch, don't be cruel to my sister. Right. So let's see. Pretty much the questions have all been answered, we're up to. Have you tried adding Tabasco to the oil to discourage the sabotage? That seems a little evil, but tempting. That seems a little cruel, but tempting, definitely. Merriam says end up as proto hoods as you have more twin 15-inch turrets around without Courageous and Glorious. Yes and no. What I think you could see is you could see a rapid battleship construction at some point during the war or something, if you've got those turrets, because basically that's 4 of your considering there are also monitors which use them, you have 12 15-inch turrets which are available when they cancel the free hours. And this is my other point about Agincourt, because we know where 12 turrets go, we don't know where 16 go. There are no traces of 4 more 15-inch gun turrets, which is going into various things. So we know where 12 go, because Renown and Repulse take 6. Courageous and Glorious take 4 between them, so that's 10. And 2 more go into monitors. So that's 12. This is one of my arguments that no, Agincourt was not getting 15-inch gun turrets because her gun turrets don't appear. And considering when she's ordered, they should have been under construction the same as those, because she's ordered at the same time, constructed at the same time, so the turrets should be in the same space as those R-class battleships. They're not. But yes, you would have 4 more turrets left. So you could do something with them. There is the point you might actually do the 3rd Renown class. You might actually do that. There's also the fact that with small tube boilers as their base, ordered already for them in advance for the R's, then they're going to be faster as it is. Now, I think, myself, looking at all this you find yourself in a pretty interesting position come 1915. You've got these ships in service, you've got more coming in service, and you've got more capabilities coming along. And that leads us to the Battle of Dogger Bank. Now, the Battle of Dogger Bank is an interesting battle. It is, how do I put this politely, a really interesting battle. In terms of what goes right, and in terms of what goes wrong. Now, historically, the Battle of Dogger Bank takes place in January 1915. Now, I was sort of thinking, right, how many station cruisers might you have available at this point? And I sort of mentally went, well, you've got 4, 4, 4 each year. There's probably actually not going to be 4 more available. But then if the Australians have and Canadians have maybe ordered some, and I've just done the British ordering, then you could have as many as 6. And I tried to make that sort of clear, but it seems to again have not gone through. But we'll see. The thing is, what do these ships' roles do they fit into if they're in this battle? If they're grouped into the battlecruiser fleet? And the thing I was thinking was, if you've got them back after this scenario and called them back after they've been off hunting off Von Spey and Von Spey squadron no problem, then they join the battlecruiser fleet. They're going to join the battlecruiser squadron because they're 28-knot ships. And that makes an interesting thing because when you add in them being 28 knots, Tiger's 28 knots, Lion and Princess Royal are both 27.5 knots. And Dogger Bank, with the light cruisers, etc., and most of the destroyers, that's a far faster force than the Germans could have. And whilst New Zealand and Indomitable are not bad ships, they're not as fast as them. In fact, HMS New Zealand can do 25 knots. Not bad, which is an indefatigable class. And, if I'm not mistaken, HMS Indomitable can also do 25 knots. So, they're 25 knot ships. The German vessels can roughly run at 25 knots, because they've got Blucher and they've got other vessels in them which limit their speed more. Which means that BT could have a force, a coherent force, which would have a 3-knot speed advantage over the Germans. And I've been over this before. The 3-knot speed advantage is key, because it allows you to cross the enemy's T and decide range of combat. And this becomes a really interesting thing in Dogger Bank. Because the Battle of Dogger Bank traditionally results in the loss of the Blucher. Traditionally, that is the result for the Germans. They lose the Blucher, they get a battlecruiser damaged, but otherwise they get home. Well, hang on, BT now has a 3-knot advantage. And yes, he's still got Seymour. Yes, he's still got all the traditional troubles he used to have. But the thing is also, what are you going to have if you have 4 ships of such a cruiser squadron there? You're going to have another admiral. In fact, you're possibly going to have another pair of admirals there. A cruiser squadron like that, that's going to be a senior cruiser squadron. It might have a vice admiral, it might be a rear admiral, but it's going to be another senior officer. Another senior officer giving out orders and watching what's going on. That's different from the Battle of Dogger Bank, as historically, when BT is undisputedly the most senior admiral there. There's no one senior enough there to argue back or go, "Excuse me, sir, is this quite right?" And the scenario that can be quite different, because if line does get damaged historically, and they have to slow down, so they can't then carry. It's going in the case of the battle cruiser. These cruisers probably go, no, our 2 of mine will deal that. Carry on, let's chase the Germans down. Carry on, let's chase the Germans down. That's far more sense. Leave 2 of these station ships to go, "Hello, Blucher, we see you can't going anywhere. Right then, 9.2-inch shells will rain down on ye." It's far more sensible. But yeah, the British now have an advantage in force structure. And Blucher, well, she now has counterparts, and the British have a lot more of them. And I said, between 4 and 6 of these ships. 4, it's not going to be another vice admiral, it's probably going to be a rear admiral. But if they do have 6, because let's say Australia or New Zealand or Canada have ordered a 1 each in the first batch, then expect there to be a vice admiral there. Another vice admiral. Beatty's a vice admiral. Another vice admiral there looking over him, marking his work. He might be the senior officer to the vice admiral and technically be able to give him instructions because he's the force leader. But that's a very different relationship. Again, if your subordinate, if your most senior subordinate is the same rank as you, then whilst you can give them instructions, giving them orders becomes more problematic, and they aren't going to expect to operate on a certain level of autonomy. And there are several good cruiser officers around. Several of them. Pete Dawson, where did Hood's turrets come from? They were built. We have their building orders, and when they're ordered, they are ordered far too late to be Agincourts. They are nothing to do with Agincourt's structure. Going on, we've got 28-knot small tube Queen Elizabeth. Would we just not see an updated set of them being built to replace battlecruiser losses? That could be an interesting thing. Who knows what would get him? But honestly, the Battle of Dogger Bank in January 1915 will turn into a very different scenario than we historically had. It's going to be a case of, oh, firepower turned up. Lots of firepower, more firepower, and faster firepower. Again, these ships have 9.2-inch guns, which aren't things you need to aren't things you normally need to think about in a fight if you're a battlecruiser, especially on a German one. But if you've got a scenario where you can choose to aim at ships which are going to look like HMS Tiger at a distance, you could be looking at that battlecruiser, that fleet coming towards you, those 5 ships, and you going, which one is HMS Tiger? Because there are 5 ships which look like her, and that's the killer which I have to avoid. And it becomes travel-class destroyers, county-class cruisers all over again. You suddenly have a scenario where the Germans at long range are going, am I aiming for Tiger? Am I aiming for a cruiser? Is it this far? Is it that far? So things would change. Now, the thing is, if the Battle Dogger Bank goes as well as it could do in this scenario, and let's be honest, it could go very well for the Royal Navy in this scenario, because when you consider the number of 28-knot ships in this battle, and you consider the order of battle of the fleets in Dogger Bank, well, there's a big problem. For the Germans, you have the Flinger, which does roughly 26.5 knots. And Seydlitz, which does 26.5 knots. And Moltke, which does 25.5 knots. And then there's Blucher, which is 25.4 knots. On the Royal Navy side, you would now, as said, have not just Tiger, but have 4 to 6 station cruisers, which could do 28 knots. So that's a knot and a half advantage over their fastest battle cruisers. And then you've got the 2 Lions, which can do 27.5 knots again, so they have a knot advantage over them. And yes, you go, well, we have 8 12-inch guns and 10 11-inch guns, but the thing is, the 3 faster battle cruisers on the Royal Navy all carry 13.5-inch guns and carry 8 of them. So whilst you have 12 and 11-inch guns, and do have slightly more of an advantage in those numbers of guns, because you have 20 11-inch guns and 8 12-inch guns to what is 24 13.5-inch guns. If you're supplementing that with 32 to 48 9.2-inch guns, and Blucher only has 8.3-inch guns, and you're all capable of doing roughly, if you want to keep Blucher as part of your force, you're now limited to roughly 25 knots, whereas the rest of that force is all limited to roughly 27.5 knots, you have a problem. You have a big problem. They're able to seize your T. They're able to turn and engage you at will. They're able to set the range. They're able to do at Dogger Bank what von Spee did at Coronel. And look at the results of Coronel when von Spee could do that. Yes, you're fast ships. Yes, you're capable ships. But you can't necessarily run away. And the British, on top of that, have 7 light cruisers to the Germans' 4, have 37 destroyers to the Germans' 18 torpedo boats mostly. 4 submarines as well along there. And by the way, the destroyers and a large number of light cruisers come from the Harwich force and the submarines. So again, let's consider this battle. Beatty's a perfectly good single engagement officer. Yes, he's going to muck up, but if you've got other admirals there watching him, it should be able to mitigate things, like Evan Thomas did at Jutland. And then we have a very big problem, because if you're saying in January 1915 the Germans get a similar result as the British did historically at Coronel, i.e. They lose the Flinger. They lose Seydlitz. They lose Moltke. They lose Blucher. And they lose most of their light cruisers and torpedo boats. That's a problem. That's a big problem, because also they're going to lose their admiral, aren't they? They are going to lose Hipper, because he's probably going to die in that. So the Germans will now have lost von Spee, and they'll have lost Hipper, and they'll have lost their East Asia squadron, and they'll have lost their first scouting group in battles a couple of months apart. And the reason they will have done this is because the British will have had enough 28-knot ships to be able to dictate the flows of those battles. So let's answer some questions in the chat, because there are a few. Any good cruiser rear admirals that might go chasing off all the Germans? Hood, there's dozens of them. Craddock. There's a very real possibility. Let's put it this way. If Craddock wins at Coronel, he could be called back as the new Vice Admiral in charge of this squadron. And we know how aggressive Craddock is. There's a very real possibility. If Craddock wins at Coronel, he gets recalled with those two ships back there to be the Vice Admiral in charge of the squadron. So you have Vice Admiral Craddock now behind Vice Admiral Beatty. And Craddock is very much an engage the enemy more closely admiral. And no concept of, we stop to kill this one while those get away. That's not him. He's not the world's best admiral. I'm not claiming he's definitely not even as good. Definitely not in Space League in terms of as erudite and as, you know, a strategical thinker, but he's a good admiral. He's a good, solid cruiser admiral, and if he's won this battle and come back, he's going to do interesting things. Pretty much resistance is more likely to be the option. If you end up deciding to go with free variations of the R-class as battle cruisers, it's going to be resistance. And that'd be quite interesting one to see what happens. Hanny McPhee, there was plans to turn the OIC officer in command Humber into a CIC with the presence of a cruiser squadron and vice admiral, but that option was never exercised. It would be very likely that it would have formed that. That could well have been part of it, but as said, I have this feeling that the vice admiral comes from. It could well be Craddock if he's won Coronel. It would also seem a good, sensible way to reward him for winning it. Early in Dagger Bank, were they available for Heligoland Blight in 1914? I don't think so. As said, I don't think they're going to get to that battle, because that's August 1914, as I discussed before. I don't think they're going to be there that early. Even if they literally, I could see them commissioning between September and November 1914. Tech team. It would be nice if they are retained. I'll be discussing that later, though. Prince Stoger, if there's another Vice Admiral at Dogger Bank, would there be a slight signal to BT telling the sort of signals out? Maybe post-battle shaming Seymour and the two things. One of the things is that it's very fashionable today in history to shame Seymour, but at the time period, there was very much a view amongst the senior officers that the buck stops with the Admiral, not the staff. It's kind of like a bad workman blames his tools. A bad admiral blames his staff. They're your staff. You're responsible. The buck stops with you. So, snooty signal, possibly something of, "Excuse me, sir, could you check your signals?" Or, alternatively, just flying completely different signal to their own ships and just expecting everyone to follow them. And does Raider go down with Hipper as another part of the battle flight? Possibly. That's all, though, for a long-distance future of things work out. Black excellent. I can see the newspaper. Hero of Coronel wins at Dogger Bank. Well, especially if BT does do how the signals body does for historically, and he falls behind, then Craddock is going to get the praise. Is going to get the credit. But he'll probably try and claim as much as he can for it. Harrison, yeah. The thing is, I don't want to knock Coronel, but I don't want to knock Craddock. Okay, he's a good admiral, but everyone is an individual and everyone has their strengths. Von Spey is more of a strategist. I would say Craddock, to my mind, is possibly a better leader, and is definitely a more aggressive commander. I would say Von Spey you need in charge of a large fleet. Craddock is more who you should probably have in charge of a cruiser squadron. But the thing is, Von Spey has been handpicked to be out there in the Far East, making the most, giving them the best value for money for their fleet in the Far East in terms of its presence, deterrence capability. And again, that's the kind of mind you need for that. Knight, you're again jumping on to the end of the topic. We are at 1915. We are a long way away from the Hawkins class yet. So, yeah, that's not something we need to talk about right now. That's a long way. That question's a long way off getting an answer. It's like I keep booting the questions which are for the end of the topic all the way down to the end of the topic, because if I answer them now, it's just going to get completely disjointed. So, saying all that, now we have to consider the wider war, because if you end up with, let's say, between 8 and 12 in service, coming in service throughout 1915, they're going to have a wider impact. You're possibly going to see a couple turning up at Gallipoli. As said, I could be very sure that a couple of these could be partnered with Lord Nelson's in Gallipoli, in sort of the Mediterranean, to keep the Germans, to keep the Goeben and the Breslau exactly where they're supposed to be. Because again, if we consider the Goeben, she is a Moltke class. Yeah. And she's got, 10, 11-inch guns. Well, that's all well and good, but she doesn't have a broadside of 10 guns, does she? She has a broadside, if I'm not mistaken, of 8 guns. Yeah. Actually, no. Well, it depends if they're just firing cross-deck. I really don't want to recommend firing cross-deck, but yeah, she theoretically could get all 10 guns to fire broadside. But the thing is, if you've got a couple of these vessels down there, and you've got a couple of the Lord Nelsons, suddenly the Goeben's chances of getting out and getting away become far lower, because, well, she could do 25.5 knots. 2 of these vessels doing 28 knots means they have a commanding speed advantage. And they can pick the engagement range. They can pick they could choose to hold off engagement until nighttime when you can't see as long range, and so they can get close enough to engage. Now, I don't think he would. I've already discussed Black Maxus. I've already talked about Fisher. I've already talked that one earlier in the video. Zachary Gherkin, actually, if the RM produced these cruisers, effectively doing what the Germans thought the RM was doing back when they built Glucker, do you think they'd at least be trying to get 1 or 2 more built? As in building more blue skies? I don't think the Germans can do. Because as I said before, and I've done a whole video on the Battle of Jutland, the fleets of Jutland, there is a reason the Germans' fleet looks so unbalanced once you start looking at it as an overall force. There is a reason why they only new cruisers they have built are the ones for the Russian Navy. There's only so much money they have, there's only so many yards they have. Whilst they might want to, if they build these ships, then that's going to be not building a battle cruiser or not building a battleship, and that's more valuable to them. So, no, I don't see them getting these ships. But that's the point. That's what these ships are for. These ships are going to be for the wider war. They're going to be useful in the wider war. I could see you finding them sitting up in the North Sea, but I could also see, part of the Grand Fleet, part of the battle cruiser fleet, as said, a squadron. I could think you could find them both, but I think you're also going to find ships in Gallipoli. I think you're going to find ships wandering around the world hunting for surface raiders, because again, these ships are going to be absolute nightmare for a surface raider to deal with. It is any of them, and this is what you do. This is what you do with ships like this. Because what you're basically building, and let's be honest with this, the battle cruiser's taken on the role of the second line, of the second great battleship, of the fast battleship, the second battleship second class, the various definitions of them, in terms of its deterrence and presence around the world. It's something you can deploy rapidly around the world to show up in a place and go, we are really, really interested. But the trouble is, the armoured cruiser role, which it sort of is often considered as replacing, had actually been the role below that in the deterrence mission. They'd been the station flagship. They'd been the thing which turned up and go, hello, I'm the local station admiral. What the frigate are you doing? Because the next admiral who turns up after me is going to turn up with a large fleet and is going to start making a mess. Or it's going to be me, because they're going to send out ships to reinforce me, and I'm going to make a mess. And that's something which has to be considered. It's useful. It's a problem we have today, where we have kind of pancaked our force structure all around warfighting to such an extent that we don't have the force structure for deterrence anymore. We no longer have the variations in force structure and capabilities we can send. And Britain's actually, to an extent, rebuilding this. It's got the OPVs present in places of the world. It's now got Type 31s it's building. And then it's going to have the Type 26s and 45s or 83s as time goes on. And then it's going to have a carrier group above that. So it's basically got levels of the OPVs are taking over the sloop role of the constant presence in a region, of popping around going, hello, how are you? We're friendly. The 31s are going to be the slightly less regular visitors, but usually a more constant forward presence of, hello, yes, we are very interested in this area. And then if a larger escort turns up, one of the ones further up the food chain, it's a case of, hello, we're extremely interested in current events and would like to make sure that you understand our interest, and would really like you to understand the full breadth of our interest. The trouble is, the level above that is sending an amphibious task group or a carrier battle group, but, when you send those, it's basically going, hello, so, we not only want to demonstrate our interest, we want to demonstrate just how much firepower we can get here when we need to. See, they turn up in levels to almost an aggression level. But it's not an aggression, but it's a very much assertive. It's not aggressive, but it's very strongly assertive. This is how much force we can bring you. Now the thing is, when the armoured cruisers go, the Royal Navy loses that level, and that causes all sorts of problems for them in terms of managing their deterrence around the world, their presence around the world. It's one of the reasons why the battle cruisers get worn out so much in the interwar period doing round-the-world cruises, because they're having to fill in this role. Because you don't have the station crew. So either something is... At some point, you suddenly lose that vessel which was there, so you either need to send it's either worthwhile sending a battle cruiser, or it's not. You no longer have that in-between choice. And that's what these vessels would recommend. And in wartime, they'd still represent that. Because, let's be honest, in wartime, if there's a situation in which really you want to send something bigger than a town class or the other cruisers you have available, but let's be honest, the town class and the sea class are the fastest cruisers you have available, RFUs and those things, that can actually go and operate around the world, you've got to detach a battle cruiser. But you honestly don't really want to detach the battle cruisers, because you rather need them and focus them on the actual theatres where you're actually conducting active combat operations. Well, this gives you that option. This gives you the option of deterring things. This gives you the option of sending these ships off to be flagships, and very modern-looking flagships, in terms of your operations with the Japanese, or operations operating in the Middle East, or etc. against the Ottomans. These are going to be very capable assets to send to demonstrate British power and interests. And yes, there's all sorts of things going to be going on in terms of firepower and what they could be doing. Exactly, Henry McPhee. I always see the Anglo-Zanzibar War as a good measure of this. It's out of time frame, but it shows how, while there are battleships, there's still the larger cruisers that respond to battleship role. Yeah. Now, the thing is, in terms of the scenario of where they would be the Knight 681 you just brought up, the armoured cruiser retired. While these vessels are very much entering service while World War One has started. So they're not going to be retiring armoured cruisers at any point yet. Because the moment there's a war, they're not going to be retiring those cruisers, okay? But the thing is, they would have been planning to if there hadn't been a war. So the fact they enter service after war begins means you're not going to be retiring an armoured cruiser during the war. They're kind of like retiring the dreadnought, the pre-dreadnought battleships, as in the what I call the Royal Sovereign type battleships. You're not going to retire them in the middle of World War One. You're just not. They're useful assets to have in second line and even third line roles. They're useful to have. They're justifiable in wartime. Post-war, they're probably going to mean the armoured cruisers are going to cease to be in service of the Royal Navy within about 6 weeks of World War One ending. So within about 6 weeks of World War One ending, there's going to be not a single armoured cruiser left working in the Royal Navy. More than likely. But that's a long way from this point. This point is during the war. These assets are going to be engaged and are going to be fighting. They're going to be high-profile targets. Remember, they're going to look like battle cruisers as well. They look like Tiger. So in a nice way, there are going to be submarine captains who are going to look and go, oh, I've seen a battle cruiser. Maybe I can sink it. Now, yes, they're going to go fast enough that probably they can dodge most of the threats from submarines, etc. in this period, but they're still there. And the reality is, there's also going to be the fact they're going to have good gunnery control fitted to them. If you're fitting 9.2-inch gunships in the lines of HMS Tiger, you're going to fit them with good gunnery control. And that's another important thing to think about when we're talking about Gallipoli or we're talking about those operations, because one of the problems they had out there was that whilst Queen Elizabeth had very good gunnery control while she was there, other ships which were there were slightly less modern with their gunnery control. And they hadn't had their systems as upgraded as much. And if you want to do fire control for amphibious operations, you need to be just as precise, if not more so, than for naval combat. Because if you get it wrong, you have a habit of hitting your own people. Now, I would say it's a bit cruel sometimes, the Gallipoli campaign, when people start saying there were no ships there. There are many monitors the Royal Navy sends in, and that's the trouble. They often get ignored because they're small ships, but they were the most sensible ships to send because they could get in closer to the shore and blast away. And there's actually one of the only surviving monitor I can think of from the Royal Navy of that period is sitting in Portsmouth Dock. And it's worthwhile going around and visit. I've actually done a video about her on this channel. If these ships are so useful, then whatever of them will survive the war will need a major refit or replacement because they'll be worn out. Pretty much. There is a rule of thumb I tend to use, which is, for most capital ships, 1 year of war equals 3 of peacetime, in terms of their service, because they mostly cruise around and only go to battle speed in combat times. We have for cruisers, it can be interesting. Destroyers, it's usually 1 year of war equals 6 years. 1 year of war equals 6 years of peacetime in terms of usage of the hull, and it's roughly the same, I'd say, with carriers because they have to go to high speed so often for operating for recovering and launching their aircraft, especially in this period. That it's always like 6 years of peacetime in terms of their service because it's how their engines are used. I think the engines would be worn out long before the hulls, but I think these would probably be talking. We wouldn't be talking 1 year equals 3 years, but I don't think we'd be 1 year equals 6 years either, because they're not quite doing the same as destroyers, and they are made to go at higher speeds anyway, and they are made for more endurance. I would probably put them as 1 year of war service is going to equate to 4.5 to 5 years of peacetime service. So their machinery is going to be, by the end of the war, it's going to be equivalent of 20-year-old machinery. So they're all going to need new engines after war's over, despite the hull only being about 4 years old. Zachary, I discussed that already earlier. Basically, the answer is no. Because these come from the same discussion. They come from the same discussion point. And what I will say is I will do... if there are questions which are sort of repeating, I'll go through it again at the end. Okay? The only reason I'm not stopping in the middle of the video to do them is because I know some people find that very annoying. So... then we have the Battle of Jutland. If there is a Battle of Jutland, I think I can definitely see there being the Battle of Doggerbank. Still. But the Battle of Jutland becomes a very interesting, different battle, because suddenly you have the fact that historically at Jutland there is first scouting group. And we know how well the Germans are doing with construction during the war. We know how well they can build ships. They don't get any out, pretty much. Baden and her sister are the only ones that get finished. So, in terms of them getting more battle cruisers in time, that's highly unlikely. So, as we discussed, the Flinger, Seydlitz, Moltke are all gone. They're all gone in this by this scenario. In which case, they are left with Von der Tann, which is a nice enough ship. They're left with Von der Tann. And they're left with Lutzow. They've got Lutzow and Von der Tann. They may have put some push on to get Hindenburg in. But the problem is these ships are still going to be 26.5 knot ships in a 28 knot ship world. And you're going to have faster Queen Elizabeth class. You know, okay, as I said, they might have aimed for 28 knots. They might have got 26 knots. Again, it might be the same with the R's. So, a nice way. The Royal Navy could have 26 knot battle line of R's and Queen Elizabeths, which could be doing all sorts of things, and could also be deployed. It could still have historically 5th Battle Squadron as it was historically with the battlecruiser force. You're going to have these 28 knot Tiger Cubs going on. By 1916, you could have as many as, well, if none have been lost to torpedoes, and that's where I see the main threat to them being coming from, you could have as many as 12 to, 18 in service. So you probably will have at least, I would say, the lion's share of them, at least 8. At least 8 to 14 in this area. In these divided between the forces, probably 12, probably 2 groups of 6 if they're able to have that, and have a squadron of 6 with the battlecruiser fleet and a squadron of 6 with the ground fleet. That's gonna change things if the Germans come out in 1916. Again, you're going to have another senior admiral with the battlecruiser force who's going to be just as likely to send instructions. Again, if it's still Craddock, the one thing you can not critique him for is his signal discipline. He does send reports back to the Admiralty quite regularly. Now, you could say, well, if he's with Beatty, is he going to rely on Beatty? Probably not, because, and especially if he's still with him by this point, he's been with him for over a year. He knows how good he is at sending signals. He's going to be doing it himself. He's going to be a core part of it. So the Battle of Jutland, A, is going to have a significantly faster British battlecruiser force. But it's also going to have the ground fleet have a slightly faster battle line. And it's going to see the Germans be significantly weaker in their first scouting group. Significantly weaker. It's only if Hindenburg is actually pushed through and completed over a year earlier than she was historically. Because historically, she comes into service in May 1917, commissioned. She's commissioned. She's actually not in service till, well, proper service for at least another 2 months after that. And the Battle of Jutland, of course, is... I'm clarifying the exact day from memory. 31st of May to the 1st of June 1916. So she would have to have been commissioned April at the latest, probably February 1916, in order for her to be used in this battle. But there again, if you've lost 3 ships, there's going to be a push to do it. Or the Germans have 2 battle cruisers for this fight. 2. Two battle cruisers that are going to come up against HMS Tiger, HMS Queen Mary, HMS Lion, HMS Princess Royal, 2 Indefatigables, 3 Invincibles, and 6 of these Tiger Cubs. Plus, perhaps perhaps 4 of the Queen Elizabeth class, doing 26 knots, maybe doing 28 knots. Yeah, let's all think what probably happens to the remainder of the German battlecruiser force, to the first scouting group. Especially if the Queen Elizabeth class are 28-knot fast battleships. Because suddenly you have the Queen Elizabeth's Tiger, and Queen Mary also can do 28 knots. And the Tiger Cubs. You end up with a good, well, you know, how do I put this politely? 2 battle cruisers, 4 battleships, and 6 large cruisers, station cruisers, that can all do 28 knots. Closing in on you. And your top speed's 26.5 knots. Did they even risk first scouting group in this scenario? Did they even do it as historically? And yes, let's say they do run into the high seas fleet, but they can run away from them that much faster. As I've said, there are few. Once you start going down this route, these ships seem very, very sensible and very, very useful. And something which Britain could do. And if the if the first scouting group gets annihilated, whoever's in charge of first scouting group, because remember, it's not going to be Hipper. He died back at Dogger Bank. It's not going to be Hipper. So, whoever's in charge of that force, and there are a few options, but whoever's in charge is probably going to not last any longer. And then Shear's going to go, do I turn about? The thing is, the Battle of Jutland might not happen, because if first scanning group gets annihilated, does Shear keep coming on, or does he run back home? And the British never find their ground fleet, find a high seas fleet, because the other scenario, this is worthwhile talking about here, is in this scenario, the British still have 28 dreadnought battleships and 9 battlecruisers. But the Germans, whilst they still have their 16 dreadnought battleships, only have 2, maybe 3 battlecruisers. And they've probably still brought their pre-dreadnoughts with them, which is going to restrict their speed of movement. I mean, this is a battle which could be absolutely a hammering. An absolute hammering for first scouting group and whatever remains. If they do have 3 ships, 3 battlecruisers, they might survive a little better, but the odds are if they have just 2, which is what they probably would historically have, based on the history and reading, because no matter how much effort they put into it, I don't think they could shave an entire year or more off the entry of the Hinden into service. In that case, of the Hindenburg into service, in that scenario, The Germans have their last two battle cruisers sunk. They're lost. And the High Seas Fleet returns to being a fleet in being without even having the Battle of Jutland. In which case, that's another glorious battle for the Royal Navy, but it's still frustration that the Germans are hiding in harbour. Now, the point you also have to think about is if Gallipoli's still taking place, which it probably has, considering I said Goeben probably still escapes because they're not going to affect that, and we haven't redeployed BT to somewhere it could actually be useful, as we discussed in a previous one, then the odds are quite serious on this one, that you're not doing the Baltic plan. But you are possibly going to be still wanting to do an airstrike with aircraft. And you haven't got Furious, you haven't got Furious to do conversions to. So there is actually a bit of a weird option here. You see, HMS Hermes, good old 95. She's laid down historically in 1918, but they've been working on a design earlier. And they worked on several variations of design. She's ordered in April 1917 and laid down January 1918. But the thing is, imagine if you don't have the battlecruiser losses. You historically did. Okay, you don't have the battlecruiser losses of the Battle of Jutland. You've won another battle where your battlecruisers and your heavy cruisers have basically annihilated their opponents. And as you've learnt that a High Seas Fleet returned home with its tail between its legs, but you haven't had a battle. They're still hiding in harbour. If you've got those resources available, do you order aircraft carriers? Did the Royal Navy start building aircraft carriers, ordering them not in 1917, but in 1916? And if it ordered them in 1916 after the Battle of Jutland, let's say June 1916, they decide to push through in the order so they can do the strike capability, that would fit with Cuckoo timeline, all those things quite viably. You could be seeing a strike from carriers. If you consider Hermes itself was laid down in January 1918, and even with all the events of the pause, post-World War I, etc., is launched in September 1919. Now, admittedly, she's not commissioned until 1924 because of other things in terms of costs and moving things around. But let's be honest. Let's say she's ordered 1916 and they lay down a version of her. Now, I would say if you're going to lay down a version of her in that period, you should possibly be looking at the Courageous class for in terms of your hull dimensions, and possibly even this class for the hull dimensions. And therefore, you'd be talking about something which is roughly going to be 20,000 tons. So it's going to be a little bit bigger than her. She was, roughly. And is going to be roughly 240 meters long. Whereas Hermes historically was 183 meters long. Now, the thing is, if such a vessel does get ordered and laid down, and let's say you build 3 or 4 of them, well, you could be talking about especially if it's built from a carrier from the deck up, from the keel up. It's going to be quite an efficient design. It's probably going to be an island design because that's what the Royal Navy's favouring in that period. And you suddenly get another role for these vessels. What is the other role for these vessels? What is their other potential duty in such a scenario? Carrier escort. Let's be honest, partnering up with a carrier to protect these carriers so that the carriers can go in and do their job makes a lot of sense. These are ships which are powerful enough that they can, if necessary, go toe-to-toe with and hold off a battlecruiser, but none of the German ones exist anymore. You've basically made it to the point where, as long as it's fast enough, you can get away from the German heavy units anytime you want, and there's anything that can catch up with them is not going to be able to fight one of these station cruisers. You almost actually eroded the mission for the battlecruiser force with them. So combine that And I could see you getting a series of raids, probably commanded by Tirith or others from the Harwich Force, Keys, going out and launching strikes on Wilhelmshaven with their carriers. And the trouble is, Wilhelmshaven doesn't have a lot in the way of defences, because they don't expect anyone to get in there. Yes, they have torpedo nets up at the beginning of the war, but no submarines are going to get into Wilhelmshaven. A SOP with cuckoo attack with enough torpedo bombers, let's say you have a couple of these carriers of old, and let's say they carry... Well, let's say that give them an air group of roughly 72 aircraft. Okay, let's not go too massive. And let's say they're each carrying 48 of the SOP with cuckoos. You have 96 torpedo bombers turn up over Wilhelmshaven. Well, yeah, you've got 16 dreadnoughts in there. By my maths, that's with 96 torpedo bombers. That's probably 6 torpedo bombers per ship. And okay, those torpedoes are not going to be like... If I can get my lovely... I need to get my torpedo. You don't need to get up. You need to help me. Okay. They're not going to be they're not going to be World War II torpedoes with the tension system and everything to make them belly flop that the Royal Navy has for the Swordfish. And AUKUS, I'm sorry to take that off you. But they are probably, and they're not going to be as big as they were historically when they sort of dived in. They're heavy. So they're probably going to, they were testing systems, so they are probably about half of them going to hit the bomb, which means you're going to have 3 torpedoes run true. Now, let's say 1 in 3 torpedoes hits their target. That means all 16 ships get at least 1 torpedo in them. The odds are half of those are going to hit areas which are going to be critical. And let's be honest, the reason I'm expanding that is because in harbour, where they think they're safe, are they going to have all the watertight doors closed? No, so that expands what's a critical area that can be hit critically. And secondly, are they going to be prepared or expecting it? No. And that's a problem. Because if the Germans get hit in harbour in Wilhelmshaven, A, that's going to change quite a lot of the world's idea about the value of these ships. But suddenly, it's going to mean the German high seas fleet is going to be damned if they do, damned if they don't. Because if they stay in harbour and don't come out again, the British are just going to come back and hit them again. And maybe they're going to bring 4 carriers this time. And yes, the Germans can add in air defences. Yes, they can have fighters up. Yes, they can have all the things they want. But if they're not moving, they're not safe. Or they can withdraw them into the Baltic. In which case, they are now no longer a threat to the UK. And the UK can do whatever it likes, really. The Royal Navy's just pushed the Germans out of the North Sea and has complete sea control of the North Sea. So, you know, at that point, what happens? Does the Royal Navy want to do some support the army to do some amphibious operations up the coast, up the North Sea coast of Germany, to get round the various fighting lines in the Western Front? What do you do? What do you do? So the thing is, this is a scenario which is very likely to come through. Why? Because, well, if you don't have the battlecruiser losses, it's harder to justify building more battlecruisers, i.e. the admirals. And they are built as part of way justified, but to replace losses. Don't fall over. No, stop. Licking my seat, please. And you're that. That's because you kept licking the seat. It is. That goes there. That goes there. And if you fall down and I leave you falling down on the stream, I will get told off by Mum. So, yeah. Stay. Army, stop causing trouble. Right. There we go. Oh, you think, after all that, you think you deserve a biscuit. You think you deserve a biscuit. You always believe you deserve a biscuit. Anyway. And if they divert fighters as well to protect the fleet, then that means they have less fighters over the Western Front. This is all going to be problems. This is giving the Germans a lot of problems. Now, whilst I think that there are some of you who are putting forward the right idea of going, well, if they can't do stuff in the North Sea, do they go and concentrate on being a Baltic fleet? That is a potentiality, but I don't see them doing that until after they've been hit. And the trouble is, if they do that after they've been hit, then that's going to be withdrawing from Wilhelmshaven. That's going to be admitting defeat. That's going to be a massive embarrassment. They might still have to do that. And so, yeah. You have now changed the course of the war by simply changing the forces available at certain points. And I'm sure you have lost some of these ships during it. I do not believe they'll have got through it intact, and completely intact. They are, after all, cruisers in a battlecruiser world. Large cruisers in a battlecruiser world. But they are going to be useful. So with that in mind, the rest of the war, how does it end? I think if you do have this scenario A, the Royal Navy's involvement in wars is going to be remembered very differently. As I said, I don't think Jutland has it happens, historically happens. I think you're also going to have an amphibious operations at some point on the coast to get around the lines. They become more of a likelihood. And I think you therefore leave World War I with a very different impression, maybe, of the value and utility of Navy, even to the ground warfare. I also think with the attacks on harbour of carriers, there's going to be a very different appreciation of the value of carriers. And with these ships' utility, there's going to be a very different appreciation of the value of them. Which leads us to the next area of discussion, the post-war world. And there's a reason I've got the Hawkins class here, because in the nicest way, there's no scenario I think of where you have these ships under construction that the Hawkins class are constructed as they were historically. They're just not going to be. If they are constructed, they're going to be a continuation of these. They're going to be a next generation. Which makes sense. They're going to be a next generation of 9.2-inch gun cruisers. They're going to be as focused as though that could be. But if that's your scenario, if they are quite literally the next generation of those, then that's going to change the Washington Naval Treaty and the debate about that. Now, I already brought in the carriers as being more common and more useful, and probably they're going to be under construction. But there's also potentially the Admiral class are still being built, because I said, they are built not because of wartime needs. The Admiral class were built for the future of the Royal Navy, for the next war. The Royal Navy, even as World War I was going on, were looking already to the next war and knowing that they were going to have to deal with painful cuts post-war, because there's always cuts after a major war. It's almost in direct proportion to the level of conflict that the war had. And they knew they would therefore, anything they would need to have immediately available for any war in the next 10 years after war, they should probably build now. Now, that's an interesting thing in the world where these are, but I'm just going to answer Hanny McPhee's question. Now, you said you think the Hawkins class being produced for their original land cruiser role for commerce protection, but not used as heavy cruisers they were. Well, they were never built as heavy cruisers. They were never, the nicest way, heavy cruisers was never what they were built for, and this is one of the problems you have with the London Treaty versus the Washington Treaty. These ships were never built as heavy cruisers. They were always large light cruisers. They were always light cruisers. They're not built as heavy cruisers. A heavy cruiser is this thing which comes in after the London Naval Treaty, where they have this idea come in that there's going to be 8-inch cruisers or the heavy cruisers and the 6-inch cruisers, the light cruisers. But that's entirely something which comes in then. So the ships before that do not have that distinction. It's not something in people's concept. And the Atlantic cruiser role is a very interesting role. But the thing is, justifying it as a separate entity when you have when you have enough of these cruisers under construction, in terms of these station cruisers, and you also have all the light cruisers, the C's, the D's, and the E's under construction, is very, very difficult. In fact, you're just going, well, you've basically you're producing all these, you're producing this level, the coastal cruiser, the station cruiser, and the battle cruiser, and now you want to put something in here as well as an Atlantic cruiser. You're not going to do that, and even the Royal Navy's not going to go, yeah, let's add in these, because it's just, you don't need that extra level. Whatever they can do, whatever benefits they offer, can either be done by the E and the D class, or can be done by the next generation of station cruisers. So that's why I think the Hawkins would actually be evolved into 9.2-inch gun cruisers and would be that sort of role as the station cruisers. I think they'd be in that size. Now, the thing is, if your aircraft carriers in your larger generation of these cruisers are all in the 18 to 20,000 tons range with the Hermes class and built and these, there is going to be absolutely no chance that someone is going to try and go, we're not going to have any, we're going to have it as the Washington Treaty was, which was anything of the cruiser role below is completely unlimited. So what I think would happen, and what I could see happening, is again them introducing a sort of treaty where there's an article, or where the article has anything under 10,000 tons with guns of below this level are not limited, and you can build as many of these as you like. Probably going to end up with potentially the 6-inch gun cruiser in that position. It's going to potentially be 10,000 tons and 6-inch guns as the one you can build as many of them as you like. And then they're going to have a king of anything over 10,000 tons, but, up to 20,000 tons. That is allowed gunnering up to 10 inches, maybe. Maybe they allow them up to 10-inch guns. As long as they don't have capital ship guns, they're fine. So anything over 6, but below 10.1 inch, let's say. 20,000 tons, and you're allowed so many of them. Again, probably it's going to be the same number as your capital ships. Maybe more. They might go, okay, you're allowed 15 capital ships, 10 carriers, and 20 of these. Or, because again, no one's going to settle for just 5 carriers after they've done what's happened to Wilhelmshaven. No one's going to settle for it. And the Royal Navy's probably going to have more than that already in service or under construction. So it's probably going to be a grounds of, okay, carriers are allowed to be up to 30,000 tons, and you're allowed 10 of those. Capital ships, you're allowed up to 40,000 tons, and you're allowed 15 of those. And these, you're allowed 20 of them, they're up to 20,000 tons. For Britain and America. And that's going to be the workaround. But that's going to change things dramatically if you've got to run up to World War II. That is going to change things dramatically in terms of the treaty system and how it works. Because suddenly you're going to actually have a heavy cruiser or something in that role. And I'm not sure what they call them. They might call them a heavy cruiser, but I doubt it. Again, in this scenario, they have battle cruisers. Heavy cruiser as a term of phraseology does not make sense to a naval officer because we have the battle cruiser. That's the largest and heaviest cruiser. Heavy cruiser doesn't make sense. It's a political phraseology. It's not a naval phraseology. And large light cruiser sounds a bit oxymoronic. I know the good old Jackie Fisher used it, but Jackie Fisher liked these sort of things to try and cause confusion. So I think you either have them called station cruisers or something. It's not going to be heavy. It's not going to be light. But it's going to be something. Something is going to be around about them. And they are going to be, you know, anything over 10,000 tons up to 20,000 tons. You're allowed this much tonnage of vessels, which can be up to 20,000 tons on this sort of things. I don't think you're going to call them fighting cruisers. You might. There was part of me which was tempted to call them cruiser leaders, because destroyer leaders is a phraseology which they use. But there's also the point of potentially first-class cruisers, with the RS being second class and below. There are certain phraseologies around you could do, but with the light cruisers being something that has come so much and so dominant, yeah, it's going to be an interesting thing. Now, the reality is, it's going to be a scenario where the Royal Navy is going to be bigger, and the US Navy is going to be potentially bigger. Because, again, the thing that's going to be interesting for the post-World War scenario is, while the Royal Navy is going to have a lot of these which are going to be considered under the grandfathered-in clause experimental, so the Royal Navy can replace them whenever they like, the US Navy and the IJN are going to have to start building theirs right this point. So they're going to build theirs, and they're going to locked into their designs in the 1920s. The Royal Navy will be able to replace them at any point they want in the next few years. Again, command cruiser, flag cruiser, that's more modern phraseology. That's more NATO phraseology. And I don't think large cruiser is going in there again, because you've got the battle cruiser. That's your largest cruiser. It doesn't make sense. And they might continue with the armoured cruiser. They might call them frigates. They might. There is that possibility they call them frigates, or they call them, you know, great cruisers or something like that. I don't know, but they're not going to be large or heavy. Those are phraseologies which come about due to treaties. And please note, I'm saying stop it to the poodle who keeps trying to lick the back of my knee for some reason right now. I love dogs. I do. Someone wrote a whole spiel the other day going, if you're complaining about them, why do you have them, and you shouldn't have them, in a comment. And I haven't responded yet. I might do in a scuttlebutt. But the answer to that, broadly speaking, is they're a tremendous company, they're great security for the house, and they're part of my family. We've always had dogs. But the thing is, I'm always honest about my experience as a historian and the ups and downs of that and the fun of that. I'm honest about my experience of dog ownership and having dogs in the family. They are wonderful. They're also weird. And you deal with the weirdness, and it's part of the fun in some regards. Hello, you. So, I think you end up with some differences. The reason I say you'd have 10-inch guns as the limit for these cruisers is because the British will be 9.2-inch guns. The Beluga was 8.3 and won't be built. I don't see the British going to go and up their gunnery in wartime. They're going to keep to 9.2-inch guns. So they then, as they did historically the 7.5-inch guns, they ran up to 8. You're probably going to round it up to 10-inch as the limitation. I don't see the British then going, we're going to build 10-inch guns. They're going to keep to 9.2 because 10-inch doesn't offer advantages over 9.2 due to its rate of fire. They're close enough that, frankly, you might as well keep with the 9.2. And for the British, that's also going to be an advantage in terms of rate of fire, but it's also going to be probably an advantage in a few other ways as well. There might even be a scenario where you could get 4 triple guns and 12 9.2-inch guns on a ship, which could be of 20,000 tons, whereas you can only get really, unless you with better armor and better protection. Whereas if you wanted to get 12 10-inch guns on the same thing, because of the weight and mechanism of moving those shells around, and the guns themselves, you're probably going to have less in the way of protection and going to be a less capable all-round vessel. You've got carriers, you've got capital ships. The capital ship numbers have stayed the same. The carriers will have gone up, as I said, if they've been used like they could have been historically. And that's going to change things. If you've got 30,000 tons and 10 carriers as your limitation, then you're going to have a very different carrier construction policy in the interwar years. You're going to have a very different carrier strength from Britain, who will probably maxed it out quite early on. versus America versus Japan, and what Japan has. Do they have allowance of 6? Do they have an allowance of 7? If the Japanese are able to build 12 of these vessels, because they're allowed 3 to every 5, then that's going to again affect things. Because if you consider, if you're able to build as many of the light cruisers, the 10,000 ton, less than 10,000 ton, 6.1 inch as you want, and you can build these assets as your status assets, they're going to be built. They're going to take basically the heat of the capital ship race, the dreadnought race, which carried on in terms of the competition for who can build the most tech advanced one in post World War One scenario, suddenly gets converted into a who can build the best of these cruisers scenario. And again, I could see the Royal Navy having across themselves and the Empire having between 12 and 18, maybe even 20. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting scenario to see what happens. And there's also the scenario that if you get allocation of, let's say, 20 of these ships at 20,000 tons, so that's 400,000 tons, and you can build them for 9.2 inch guns and 18,000 tons, in terms of let's say 9.2 inch guns, 18,000 tons, in 3 triple turrets, then you might, I'm just saying this is an option, you might decide, well, hang on, I can build, I don't need to get 20 under the scenario, because 20 adds up to 360,000 tons, I can get 22. So you could get 22 of these ships under that scenario, if you could get them for 18,000 tons. Does that make enough of a difference? Is that worthwhile for the British, those 2 extra ships, in aggregate, over the 18,000 tons? It's kind of like, again, if you've got 40,000 tons and 15, you're allowed 15 ships at 40,000 tons for battleships, for capital ships, how does that change Nelson and Rodney's design? And that's if people have agreed to it, because again, and agreed to the building holiday for battleships, because if you've got Queen Elizabeth and the Isles in as, let's say they're 26 knot ships, let's not even say they're 28 knot ships, let's say they're 26 knot ships. That's a very scary battle force the Royal Navy has at that point. They have 10 ships capable of 26 knots with 8 15-inch guns. That's already that's enough speed that's basically those 10 ships alone could take out the entire American standard battle line, because they could dictate the range of engagement. They could dictate the battle speed. Especially because they don't have a 5 knot advantage. If there are 28 knot ships, good lord help them. And that's all considering what the Renowns, not considering what the Renowns could be. Because if the Renowns, let's say, if they started off, and remember, the Renowns are fitted with the same boilers which were going into their battleships of their generation. They're just fitted with more of them. But they had the same battleships were going into well. So imagine they were going to be fitted with small tube boilers which were to get a higher pressure and more efficient, and they still get more of them. They get basically 1.5 ships worth. Well, okie dokie. We could be talking about Renowns, which are 36 knot ships. Think about that effect on the world. If the Royal Navy's got 2 or even 3 Renown class battlecruisers with 36 knots, capable of 36 knots, and whatever the Admiral class were. And someone's already pointing out, if you've got 40,000 tons as your displacement, even if you do the same as you did with the Nell rods and you build underneath the displacement, let's say you build to 36,000 tons, you're talking about a 3 shaft design. You're talking about a 28 knot battleship. Michael Coach, will the IHM be able to build these ships and their capital ships given their infrastructure? Well, the point is, Michael Coach, under the Washington Naval Treaty, they can't build any more capital ships. They don't get to finish off hardly anything, so in a nice way they would turn to be able to building this. Their infrastructure, it might actually do their infrastructure good, because they could invest in their infrastructure building these ships, in the 1920s and the 1930s, which means their infrastructure is going to be in a better place to start building Yamatos in the 1930s. Colin Cameron, the points that I said before about the Royal Navy and the Glorious incident is they actually are going against their standard operating procedure. They are, because the operating procedure as established was that there should be a cruiser and some destroyers with each carrier. That was what they'd been aiming for. And yeah, Lord Corkenori and the people in charge of Glorious let that break down. But that should not have been the case. But that had been the pre-war operational doctrine. Basically, pre-war operational doctrine, everything looks kind of like Force H for the carriers, without the addition of a capital ship. You know, it was Sheffield, some destroyers, and a carrier. Ark Royal. That was Force H's core. They added into that Renown or Hood or whichever capital ship was available. But the thing was, that's added on by the wartime experience. And some of the doctrine in terms of surface raiding hunting, as I've discussed before. Apparently YouTube is now not receiving enough signal. Not sure why. I don't know why. Internet, everything seems to be saying it's doing okay. Got full internet access. Internet upload speed seems to be okay. Yeah. No idea why it's suddenly doing that. I've got Studio open. I don't need to be told. I do not need to be told. I have no idea why it suddenly decided this. So I hope you're not getting the Circle of Death. The spinning Circle of Doom. I have no idea why it's decided to do that. But it has. Oh, it has. It has indeed. So, okay. No China problems from your perspective. Okay, that's fine. So it's just YouTube and my internet being annoying to me. The Colorado class might be larger and have a higher speed. They might do. They might have made them larger and given them a higher speed, but there's going to be basically there's a problem for the Americans in the US Navy in terms of Congress and persuading Congress is necessary. And the thing is, you have to remember, Congress always viewed a battle fleet as a defensive asset more than they view it as an offensive asset. So they actually don't care so much about the speed. Their view is the fleet will defend them, not the fleet will go and find them. And again, if the, as I've discussed, and I'm going to be discussing a lot in a video coming up, if the fleet air arm is large enough, and the carriers that are numerous enough, then it's unlikely the Royal Navy goes, yes, we'll hand over the fleet air arm. It might be a case of they go, no, that's far too much of a component of the fleet, and that's probably the case they'd make, is it's too much of a component of the fleet. We're not handing over to anyone. And politically, again, you can't fault them. And let's be honest, in this scenario, BT's political connections is as powerful as it was, but imagine in this scenario where he's been the victor officially at the Battle of Dogger Bank and the Battle of Jutland. He's going to be damn near unstoppable politically. Damn near unstoppable. I think the IGN would go with a 9.2-inch turret. There is an argument, you've made an interesting argument that they could go with something that can be replaced with a twin 12-inch gun. A triple 9.2-inch gun that can be replaced, a turret that can be replaced with a twin 12. They could do a barbette like that. They could do that sort of scenario, so they could upgrade them and make these ships far more closer to their battle line in wartime. That is a possibility, but they might not. They might actually decide the 9.2 is a better option to go, especially for their wider force structure. Concurrent, no way the Deutschland class are built as they are in a world with in a world of hurt with these. Well, yes, because there'll be French ones, Italian ones. The interesting thing is to think, what do the Italians build in this scenario, and the French, because both of them will be able to build these ships as well. Both of them will get an allowance of these ships to build. So you think about it, the French would probably get an allowance, and the Italians, of maybe 10 each. Because if you take 2.2, or probably 9 each actually, because 2.2 times 4 is going to be 8.8. So you probably up it to 9. You probably give them an option to build 9 of these ships, a tonnage allowance to build up to 9 of these ships, which is going to be great for them. But that's going to mean they're going to have to build something. They're going to build something in this period, which is going to be big and meaty. It's going to have an effect on things. It's going to have an effect on the tonnage allowances they've got for capital ships. It's going to have an effect on the carrier tonnage allowance. It's going to affect on numbers. It's going to have an effect on everything that they're operating with. And the reality of all that, and I do say the reality of it, is going to change the treaty system quite dramatically. Might make it more equitable by the back door, just by having it, which again could lead to it being more long-term and more successful. But again, the Japanese are going to be turning around from being able to build battleships to being able to pour their attention to building these. And these are going to be their own special summer, their own special area of ships. Will they have enough? No. But will they feel they can pour their love, their passion, their fears and hopes into them? Yes. And they will do. And it's the same... It's the same with the terms of aircraft carriers and the other systems they're going to affect. There's also the scenario here that if 40,000 tons becomes the standard tonnage for capital ships, standard displacement, then you have, if you're allowed 15 of them, then for the Royal Navy and the US Navy, that takes up their tonnage limitations of 600,000 tons each. That's a big displacement differential. I mean, historically, we are talking 525,000 tons, right? And that's enough to cause a bit of a drop. But if you have 600,000 tons as your official aim, 600,000 tons. Then, for the Royal Navy alone, that means they would be able to build free, once they get rid of all the ships they agree to at Washington, free 35,000 ton vessel, free 35,000 ton vessels. Or rather, when you consider they've got 111,000 tons, that works out at 111,000 tons. So they could build free 37,000 ton vessels. Again, what's an L-rod on 37,000 tons, and if you can build 3 of them within their treaty allowance? For the USN, again, if you go with the treaty limitation, you change to 600,000 tons. Well, you've now got 74,000 tons differential. Now, the 74,000 tons means you probably complete you can complete the USS Washington with no trouble and have her in, because she's 32,600 tons. And that's still going to leave you with a good bit of tonnage to build another ship. Or you might complete a couple of Lexingtons. You might feel you can complete a couple of Lexingtons under 40,000 tons. Under your treaty limit. Again, this is the reality if you're adding in that extra tonnage. It's going to change things. The carrier tonnage is going to change things. Because, again, if you have if you're allowed 10 carriers and 300,000 tons, 10 30,000 ton carriers is enough for the Royal Navy to do their duties in terms of numbers of ships. And a 30,000 ton carrier, down displacement, that's going to be something which does have armour. That's going to be something which does have a large air group. If we're talking 30,000 ton standard displacement, we're talking something bigger than the Implacables in terms of its capability. Suddenly you have a very different scenario going on. You have a very different numbers game going on. All because you've got these ships in the middle. And that causes you to adjust everything. Because your only other option, other than including this and making those adjustments, is suddenly you make ships below 20,000 tons, you're able to build as many as you like. You raise that level of the Washington Naval Treaty. And imagine that, if there's a free-for-all for ships below 20,000 tons, you can build as many as you like. Think of all the carriers that can be built under 20,000 tons. Think of all the heavy large cruisers, and think of the trouble you'd have at the time of the London Naval Treaty. Okay, let's go through some of the questions. What would light cruiser look like in this situation? 10,000 up to 10,000 tons and up to 6.1 inch guns. So powerful. Yeah, so basically the light cruisers are going to be up to 10,000 tons. They're going to be something. I think you could see destroyers edge up to about 2,000 tons more quickly under this scenario. And I think the average light cruiser would probably end up for the Royal Navy around about 8,000 tons quite quickly. But they could go for 10,000 ton 6.1 inch gun monsters. They could all be, triple turreted, triple guns, four triple turret guns, 12, versions of the town class from quite early on. Craddock as first Sea Lord after Beatty, potentially. He's going to be, this guy who's won even more battles than Beatty. Yeah, but it's going to depend how long Beatty's first Sea Lord for, because if he's there for long enough, frankly, Craddock's going to be too old, like he was historically. Beatty was there for a long time. The question is, how big the warehouse is the warehouse the RN has to find for storage of pre-built armour upgrade for these in the counties? They don't need a pre-built armour upgrade for these. And, nice way, the counties don't exist in this scenario unless you're talking about 6-inch gunships. If they're doing that, they would probably not need it. Or, well, the 18,000 ton ones, yes, probably they would. But, that's fun of life. John Shea, YouTube's fine on my end. Anyway, so a carrier formation is one carrier, one cruiser, and roughly 6 to 10 destroyers. Basically half or a whole destroyer flotilla, the capital ship optional. A destroyer flotilla in this period was 8 to 9 ships. So you're talking during World War One, destroyer flotillas could be up to 20 ships. Post World War One, they're basically down to 8 to 9. They're down to 8 to 9 ships, depending on their duties. Okay, tribal class flotillas 8 ships. Rest of the flotillas usually 8 ships and a destroyer leader. So yeah, that was usually what the Royal Navy was normally operating on lines of, was a division of 4 destroyers at least, and a cruiser at least per carrier in any scenario. If you look at even in peacetime, they maintain it, because even in peacetime, when carriers are being moved around supposedly solo, you then look at what ships are going the same route. Hello, okay. It'll be a cruiser, and it will be usually 4 destroyers are doing roughly the same route. You complaining you're not getting patted enough. Mark Harness, 9.2-inch cruiser. Yes, Lexington with 10-inch guns and paper thin armor. This separate. Yeah, don't get me started. Dunkirk class probably wouldn't happen on this timeline either. They had cruisers or much larger battleships. Well, I think, yeah, that's the thing, is you don't need them so much in this scenario, because you have those fast ships. Prince of Toga, my mum would like to know if the dog is a poodle mix or a poodle. He's a poodle. He's a standard party poodle, aren't he? Oh. He's called Raleigh. He's a standard party poodle. He's very, very friendly. And he spends far too much time in his papa's office. He's supposed to wander around the whole family and be a family fluff. But you like to sit in here, don't you? You like to sit on my carpet and look out the window and watch for the cats out the front. And generally have hugs and pats. That's what you basically do. You sit and demand in here. I don't know. But he is a family dog. He goes off and his bedroom for the night is my mum's bedroom. That's where he sleeps. Historically, we tend to have the dog sleeping in the kitchens, but here here it's we kept trying the idea with them, but for some reason they don't like the idea of sleeping in the kitchen when everyone's on the same floor, and they feel they can come to you. So that's what he's been doing. He likes that, don't you? You do. Good lord. Lexington class carriers with 10-inch guns. I doubt you'd go for the carriers with 10-inch guns. The carriers could still be allowed 10-inch guns, or, interesting enough, there's part of me which wonders if they don't actually allow the carriers to have 10-inch guns, if they limit the carriers to 6.1-inch guns, because they do the same as they did historically, which was limit the carriers to the weaponry, which was allowed by the as many ships as you can build category. So the carriers can be limited to 6-inch guns, which might seem strange, but could actually be slightly better, and could actually see the development of a 6-inch AA gun, or dual-purpose 6-inch gun, earlier on. Which could have all sorts of interesting points, because we've already had discussions in the chat going on with the idea of, the AA cruisers. Well, if the 6-inch gun is developed to be dual-purpose, because it's fitted to the carriers, as well as the cruisers, and so you end up with a dual-purpose 6-inch gun, AA-capable 6-inch gun, etc. That's going to be interesting for its effects on later conflicts. And I think this would have had an impact on the later conflicts. It's going to give Japan something to pour their resources and desires into in terms of construction in the 1920s and 30s. Before they build the Yamato and Musashi, etc. in that class, which might change some of their thinking, might change their emotions into it a bit. But also it's going to be a scenario where, frankly, for example, Germany is going to be starting from even further back. Because if the Royal Navy has 3 37,000-ton Nell rods, which are probably going to be 3 shaft units able to 28 knots, plus whatever the Queen Elizabeth can do, plus whatever they're building in terms of after that, etc., you have problems. With the number of carriers they have, you have problems in building to match that. Even France is going to be a problem to build to match quickly. Because they're starting from that much higher. Because let's say France has 9 of these ships. Well, in which case, you're going, we have the Panzerschiff out. We're going to build the Panzerschiff. Well, yeah, you're going to have, 3 of those? Versus 9 French ships? That's basically great dream levels for the French. Also, given a few knots faster, would Nerods with 3x3 L50s but 26 knots plus knots? No. Honestly, Carl and Gasberg, in this scenario, you're probably talking them still having the 16-inch guns and being that much faster. Because that's the point. With the traditional, you're talking about something which is going to be about 4,000 tons heavier than the Nerods were traditionally, 4,000 to 5,000 tons heavier. you can do a lot in that in terms of engine and power to give yourself the speed while still keeping the 16-inch guns. So I doubt they're going to have the 15-inch 50s, but they're going to be 20-knot ships. Especially if that's what because the nice way, the reason that gun is chosen is literally because of ego on the treaty. As said, it's not sensible. It's the ego on the treaty. Am I going to review Soln's Fleet by Isonvera and Christine Isonvera? Viren. No one's sent that to me. I haven't got it yet myself. I'll look it up and see how much it costs and see whether I can stretch this month to getting it. But there's also the fact of no one sent me to review, and I don't mind. I have completely open contacts for publishing companies to send me books to review. I have a policy that the only ones which I will ever feature on the camera and ever discuss are going to be the ones that get a positive review, because I think it's a bit of me punching down hard if I'm using this platform and I am slagging off someone's book and saying I don't like it and it's terrible or something like that. I would never do that. So the rule of reviews is the only books which ever appear on here are books which I like and I think are good books and worthwhile you spending money on. And I don't mind whichever books are sent to me as long as they don't mind no criteria. That's fine. And the books I buy, and I do buy quite a lot of books myself. You know, the Nicholas Rogers one I bought myself, etc. Right. Would a potential Scharnhorst class still have 11-inch guns, or maybe 4 triple 11-inch guns? The trouble is, again, the Germans aren't being limited in many ways by what other people are doing. They're limited by their own infrastructure of what they're building. They're limited what they can build. They're not building what they necessarily want to build, but they're building what they can build as best they can. So I don't see them being able to change much, because in a nice way, the Treaty of Versailles is still going to happen in this scenario. And the Treaty of Versailles is going to be as mean to German infrastructure and maritime infrastructure as it ever was. If not, maybe more so. You never know. And that means the Germans are going to be starting from the same place. So they're not really going to have much of a chance. But again, if you've got 9 11-inch guns, that's good. But if there are, in a world where there's less many 9.2-inch gun cruisers going around and 10-inch gun cruisers, you might well consider your ships less than viable. Andrew Cox, what do you consider would have been a perfect gun cover for these cruisers? 9.2-inch. 9.2-inch is the best to go with, because 10-inch, you have to remember, the problem with 10-inch is it's got the same rate of fire as 12-inch. And so, which is worthwhile doing? That's going to be the 12-inch. 9.2-inch has the same rate of fire as the 7.5 and the 8-inch, pretty much. So, which is the one which is worthwhile going with? It's got to be the 9.2. Because that's the heaviest gun that is available at that rate of fire. And it's like when we're talking, once we're sort of talking 14 to 16.5 inch. That's got that rate of fire. That they have roughly the same rate of fire. It doesn't matter the size. That's what their systems roughly work on. And once you're above 16.5 inch, you're roughly into the 18-inch category rate of fire, and then above that, so on. So you should go for the largest gun in that rate of fire band. And so for cruisers, it's a 9.2-inch, because once you're above that, you start getting into that 10 to 12-inch rate of fire area, where frankly you might as well have 12-inch. And if you can't have 12-inch, then you might as well go 9.2-inch. It's kind of like with carriers, where if you're going with the size of them, it's how many aircraft can you store across the hangar, how many can you store lengthwise. And basically, once you're below which you can store a full aircraft width across, let's say you've got a certain width which allows you to store 4 aircraft across, right? And then you go below that. So now you can store 3, but you have a lot of extra space. There's no point to that space. You can't store the 4 aircraft. There's no point in that. It gives you a bit of extra maneuvering room when you're parking the aircraft. Yeah, that's useful, but honestly, in terms of a strictly operational perspective, there's limited to no point in that. So it's the same with guns. In the 8-inch is really this really strange thing, because it's sitting right at the lower end of its category, But it's in there because of the treaty system, because that's what they put in there. Not because it's actually a good gun or a good choice. Now, who won the story contest? That's going to be covered in the Historiathon. I don't know. Now that's interesting. Lexingtons with 30,000 tons standard. Would the Yorktowns be modified, or would they be modifying Lexingtons, or even a whole new design? It's going to be interesting. Let's be honest. Lexingtons are not 30,000 tons. They're still conversions, and so there might be treaty limits which allow conversions, but it could be higher. And the Lexingtons might actually be 40-something thousand tons once they finish, because, you know, if they've got all the additions into them, they might work them up to be able to get 40,000 tons through. Because you have to remember, they were allowed up to 33,000, from memory, 33,000 tons for conversions, and they were allowed 4,000 tons on it. So if you add that 10,000 tons onto a 30,000, the Lexingtons could be up to 40,000 tons. What does the Lexington class, limited to 6-inch guns and with an extra 3,000 tons, look like? That's a whole interesting ball game. And the thing is, you can't make 11-inch capital ships in this situation. It's too stupid. You could do. You could still make 11-inch capital ships, but that's because that's all your infrastructure can sustain. Or you have to wait to build them till you can build bigger guns, which is going to take time to develop. So that's your problem. The Germans have to hold off building battleships for about, I would say, for another year to 18 months. In terms of their delaying their construction, to and to get something bigger, and that's going to be a problem. Or they have to put money from other research, other things they're doing into their program to build those guns quicker, so they don't develop something else. Again, it's all going to be a trade-off if they want to do it at the same time. What was the rate of fire for 9.2-inch guns? Pretty much the same as 8-inch guns. It's literally the same as the rate of fire for 8-inch guns. How would the 9.2-inch shells compare to the 8-inch guns in bombardment roll? They're bigger, they carry more explosive, and they tend to have a longer range because of that. In an equivalent gun. Naval weapons says 3 to 5 per minute for 9.2-inch guns. Yeah, and most of that is the slower cycling. Again, one of the things that is often compared is the 9.2-inch guns from World War I to the 8-inch guns of World War II, and people go, this shows them. No, the same technology would have been applied to the 9.2-inch guns, it's just they're not in service with anyone. So that's the thing, you don't have the service upgrades you have on guns in the 20s and 30s being applied to the 9.2-inch. So at the same time as they giving the 9.2-inch, that's basically the rate of fire for an 8-inch gun as well. Andrew Cox, why is there such a step change in rate of fire? 8 and 9.2-inch need power loading, the same as 10-inch, or I'm missing something. Basically, it's the weight of the machinery for the power loading. So if you consider the 10-inch shell how much it weighs, and suddenly how much system you have to factor in to move it, versus the weight limit, the weights of the 8 and 9.2-inch. That's why I said it's almost basically from the 9.3 onwards. It's because they go that point past the weight boundary. Okay. Like my Maximus, the Royal Navy does G3 conversion to this scenario. They might get Admiral class conversion to this scenario. I have no idea. Or the Royal Navy might go, we have good enough wartime carriers. We don't want to build anything yet. We're happy with what we have available. And we're going to keep them in service because they're considered experimentals under the treaty. And we can replace them at any point we want to. My gosh, the Historiathon is the long duration live event. Yes, it's going to be 36 hours. Will there be a separate standalone video on story contrast contest for those who can't follow the whole event? There will be something. I will do something as well, yeah. But there will also be a fact. So I will give you timelines of when the things are going to be, so you'll know roughly when to log in if you want to see those things. Okay, you can, but you shouldn't. Yes, for the 11-inch capital ships. Princess Tiger. Perhaps it's the Scharnhorst that are considered the pocket battleships in this scenario. Potentially. Honestly, the Deutschlands in this scenario. The thing is, in this scenario, Deutschlands don't even bear mention. They're just heavy. They're just gonna fit into whatever category this is, and people are gonna look at them and go, "Yeah, they're not that great, are they?" I was going to look at them and go, yeah, they got 9 11-inch guns. This makes us powerful. And people are going to go, they've got 6 11-inch guns. And people go, yeah, you got 6 11-inch guns. So they've got 12 9.2-inch guns or 9 9.2-inch guns. And there's like 20 of them. And there's like 3 of you. And they've got 9 9.2-inch guns. And again, there's 3 of you. So, line up, you know, it's going to be an interesting battle. The Royal Navy versus you is going to be a very fun one. And have you seen the size of their 6-inch cruisers? They've all got 12 6-inch guns and there's oodles of them. There will be a post and there'll be a pre. I will give you a timeline. I will post timelines as well as all the funding stuff, etc. before the Historiathon happens. Andrew Cox, if 40,000-ton Lexis could have had more guns or bigger guns. After all, they are nasty cruisers around to defend. But they wouldn't be allowed to. Again, remember their treaty. They go to the treaty limit of 8-inch guns. So if they're allowed only up to 6-inch guns, that's what they'll have. I think I've answered that one, Maximus, on the emotional event scenario. So auto-loading 9.3 Des Moines. 9.2s maybe, yeah. Or the nicest way, the US Navy be trying to make the 10-inch gun work. We know that. We know the US Navy and the Japanese IJN would try and make the 10-inch gun work. We all know that. You dropped a stealth infrastructure video on the infrastructure. Cool, Wayne. I'll look forward to that. So, John Shea. So if the ships are increasing in size displacement, would torpedoes and maybe even submarines increase, or would it be more into torpedo explosive department, like Torpex being created earlier? I wouldn't be surprised if the torpedoes do have, submarines do have a bit of a session. What's going to be interesting to me is whether or not, if the Germans do decide they have to try and build to match these ships, or if they have, how does that affect the torpedo production themselves from World War One? Or do they get into the submarines earlier because their battle fleets rendered moot earlier? That's an interesting scenario. And Black Monster's going, post-World War II, US does a missile cruiser conversion on a 10-inch armed cruiser. Yeah, it'll be fun. I don't think Gralso makes an report in this scenario. That's well beyond the range of the scope of this video, because, as I've said, there's always a limit of it, and you really can't go past the Washington Treaty. This is going to change the world that much. You can't go past the Washington Treaty. But the thing is, there's enough stuff going on here that, frankly, it's going to be a very different piece of history. It will be a very different piece of history. And it makes sense. It fits in. I think it's not also going to break the bank of anyone. This is the point I was sort of making looking at these ships, is very quickly they really do not break the bank. Take care, Michael Cooch. You know, the 9.2-inch guns, they're available. The British are working on them. You know, if you want to go to Australia, and you'll see some of them sitting with surrounded by a load of quackers, going, hello, this is our world. So 9.2-inch guns are around, and you can get some, once if you'd kept working on them and kept upgrading them and kept them part of a ship fleet, the capabilities are quite dramatic. And please do me a favour, if you've got ultimate adult dreadnoughts, go and test out a 9.2-inch gun cruiser in the fights. Go and do it. You'll be really shocked about how well they do against cruisers, even the ones the game builds itself, which are armed with all sorts of weird things. They do well because of the rate of fire and the balancing point. And it's one of those things, again, from history, and that there's a reason the Royal Navy's armoured cruisers have 9.2-inch guns. There's a reason those 9.2-inch guns turn up. It's because it's kind of like there are sweet spots in ship design. You know, we know 10,000 tons. If you want to do something like this, it's going to be roughly 10,000 tons, and anything less is going to be compromises. You know, you want more than that, we know you're going to be at this of roughly 15,000, 20,000 tons. We can predict that, again, with the hangar size and the carriers. It's the same with guns. There are certain sweet spots of guns. And there's actually a good point in my mind at which there is the problem if you're trying to rebuild an 8-inch versus a 9.2-inch. Because you're not getting value for money. I think the 6-inch guns are going to be reserved for the vessels under 10,000 tons in this treaty scenario. I think that's what you'd end up. You'd end up with a 10,000 ton limit for vessels with armed with 6.1-inch guns and below, and you can build as many of them you like. Don't think you get an 18 6.1 6-inch gun cruiser on 10,000 tons. And also, again, this is going to sound strange, but if you look at it, you start doing the conversion with the rate of fire. A 9.2-inch gun cruiser is a far better trade versus a 6-inch gun cruiser. So if you've got those, if you've got 9, if you've got 8, 9, 12, 9.2-inch guns, the rate of firepower you're going to be delivering is never going to be exceeded by a 6-inch gun cruiser with even an extra sort of gun. It's going to be equivalent to. And that's the other point. That's the thing, is this is the point I've tried to make a lot of times with the rate of fire index, which the Royal Navy works on, why they went for the 6-inch gun over the 8-inch gun. Because it was delivering more effect in terms of the effective firepower delivered on the opponent, the effective high explosive delivered. Well, 9.2-inch gun equals into that in terms of rate. Once you've got the rate of fire and all these things going, if you've got, let's say, 8 9.2-inch guns versus 12 6-inch guns, that's going to be very similar explosive amounts delivered. It's no longer the simple trade-off of, yeah, that's obviously a better solution. And in this scenario, they're going to be differentiated enough and far enough apart enough, it's going to be worthwhile having both. So, Brock, I'm starting to think I made a mistake in having my fictional Texas Navy switch from British 9.2-inch guns to American 8-inch 55s. Depends. Could you find a decent 9.2-inch gun? Could you find something which is of a similar length, a similar sort of ratio? If you could, then it's going to be an advantage. It's a disadvantage. Come guys, there are YouTube videos of Taiwanese 240mm coast artillery that's 9.4-inch. Convincing. They are convincing. Very convincing. And that's ultimately the point. Now, I will say I'm going to answer questions for a little bit longer, but I'm going to be on Discord again this evening after I've had a quick sort of, what's the phrase? Bio break. And sort of those things out. What have we got coming up? There should be some posted videos advertising the lives coming up in the case of some of them. I've got Dan C visiting. That's Boom Boom Dan has come down to here to see the house and help out a bit for this weekend. So I'm going to try and make sure all the videos are uploaded tonight, tomorrow. So I'm going to be on Discord for about an hour, but then I'm going to be concentrating on getting those uploaded to make sure they're uploaded. So I'm free to spend Friday, Saturday. He's agreed to help out sorting out this house and doing unboxing some stuff, and I've also agreed to spend a day showing around Cornwall. So that's the kind of the deal we're doing. So I'm trying to make sure those are going to be uploaded. I will try and still fit in some of the normal Twitch streams I do on Friday and Saturday. I know I haven't done as many guerrilla streams this week as I normally do. I do apologise. I've just been so busy with builders. The builders were supposed to be finished last week. They've been here every single day this week, and they're coming back again tomorrow. So yeah, it's been fun. And as far as the bookshelves and the calixes go, as I said, next order is going to be about time when Patreon money comes in, because just sort of sorting things through, and it's going to mostly concentrate on the legs. But I think hopefully, after I've paid all the bills, which come through with this stuff, the plan is to get not just legs, but also get another couple of 4x2 calyxes, because I need them for more books. Because we always have more books. I love books. There are lots of them coming in. And thank you to everyone for your support, and thank you to everyone. As I said, we're going to do questions for at least another 10 minutes, but I just wanted to get this stuff covered before we just go into normal question time. Thank you, Paul Emmis. And again, I'll be on the Discord server. I'll be in the general chat after a bio break. For comparisons, 8-inch shells, 110 roughly kilograms each. 9.2-inch, 170 kilograms each. 9.4-inch to 115 kilograms each. Yeah. There is a difference going on there. And the big jump is between the 8-inch and 9.2-inch. And the 9.2-inch just has, how do I put this? I think it's a 200 kilogram roughly limit. If you're under the 200 kilogram limit, it's the rate of fire the machinery you have available can achieve in terms of moving stuff and the human involvement and all the things of moving these shells. And that's the difference. So I think that's why the 9.2 inches is such a sweet spot. If we think about it, 200 kilograms, once you're getting up to that level, you are getting up to a significant weight. 170 is not that much, but it's just enough light enough compared to the larger guns. It's going to have the better rate of fire. Did you ever use the Calyx desk attachment? No, but that's because I still have my desk today, the same desk which was found in Kingston University's skip. Kingston University's skip about 20 odd years ago. Actually, it might be longer than that. Actually, I think I've had it since I was about... Hang on. This is working through this mouse in my head. I think I've had it since I was 12, so about 25 years ago. This desk, which I used, was trucked away and was heading for the skips in Kingston University, and got put on a car and brought home for me, and I've had it ever since. And I still keep to it. I've still got most of the drawers. I've got actually all the drawers. It's just I keep one drawer, the drawer which goes in this space here. I never have in because I bash my knees into it all the time. It just doesn't work with a modern chair. But I still have the 3 drawers in there, and I have the drawer for it is sitting back there, so I have the full set. Thank you, Night Heron Productions. Thank you for all the super chats and super thanks, by the way, to everyone. They really do help the channel keep the channel going, and they really do help my book addiction and buying all the books and all the shells for the books, which are what we've been concentrating on buying recently. Oh, good lord. It's fun. I don't know. And as said as well, please do remember the brew ships, the patron suggestions are open to the public, and they're open to go and comment on. And as said, the vote is going to be... I'm going to do a thing where the vote is going to be open to all members of Patreon, all patrons, but also people, if they want to pay one off, they'll be able to go in and pay to vote. So if people just want to do that for once, that's going to be open. Right, if we are seeing a large tonnage allowance for carrier conversion, how does it affect the Kagi and Kaga? Oh, good lord, who knows? They might be better, they might be worse. I think one of the interesting scenarios you have in this, if you've got the large tonnage and larger conversion allowance, that's going to allow some freedom in terms of the ship developments. They could try. I think you're going to get them finding out more quickly. Nations finding out there is a ceiling to the number of aircraft they can operate. The quicker you get to the 100 aircraft mark and realize that actually more than 90 makes things very, very complicated in terms of managing in a carrier, and the humans. It's the humans and the complexity of the humans and juggling all of the variables going around that makes it very problematic. The more quickly you end up with probably a growth in the size of carrier aircraft. Again, there's a video coming up which is me and Drac discussing these sorts of things, and Drac has a theory which I do to an extent agree with, of the twin-engined aircraft, and he discusses that quite liberally in it. That's going to be, once that's edited, that's going to be put up as a premiere on a Tuesday. I think that's not next week, if I remember correctly. If I go through this, that's Two Historians. That's going to be on the 12th of November. The Royal Navy that could have been, with Drac NFL. We recorded that actually on Tuesday, though. I think, was it Tuesday? Was it Wednesday? It was Wednesday. We recorded it yesterday. Remember now. Hey. Pick the Lord Nelson's Sniper 2-inch versus Rosetsky's 24-cm. Austrian shots were generally heavier than British with the same bore. Yeah. It was a pleasure. Hope everyone enjoyed it. That's the main thing. And question chat, what's going on at the moment for people who just joined in? Oh, lots of things. Lots of things. Hello. Okay, what are you up to? You're looking proud. You're looking at me with proud stare. You're trying this for more biscuits again. You do realise you're going to get a tubby puppy. If you keep milking the chat for biscuits, you're going to be a tubby puppy. You're going to get fat. It's bad enough I'm fat because I'm not doing enough exercise. I take you for wonders and all sorts of things. But if you eat enough biscuits, that won't make have any difference. Chat, back me up. Please back me up. Back me up, chat. Back me up. Okay. But you're going straight out after when this finishes in about 5 minutes time. You're going straight out then, okay? All right? Yes, I love you too. Oh, good lord, you poodle. What timeline? Okay, Ronan, are one of you builds dreadnought vintage super cruisers? Yeah. Blackman Texas, F7 F Tiger Cat earlier would be awesome. It's the sort of thing you could see happening. What period will that discussion with Drac be covering? It's roughly, I think the actual version of the actual will be aired is going to be roughly 2 hours and 40 minutes roughly of footage of discussion. So I might make it into 2 hour and 20-minute videos. And I might make it into... I might leave it as 2 hours and 40 minutes. But I'm not sure if everyone's going to watch it all if I put it as a 2 hour 40-minute video. But basically we run from World War One through to the present day and look at the future as well. In terms of aircraft carrier design. Yeah, Sea Mosquitoes, definitely. Or Sea Hornets. Sea Clarke, would a pull you inline twin-engine aircraft work on a World War II carrier? It could in theory if you adjust it, but it's also gonna... There's a high probability of things getting bashed when you're coming in for the land as on a carrier because of the way things move. You're on your own. You're all cruel. I see, UA Dreadnought. Is it somehow related? Yes, I did some designing in Dreadnought. UA, I designed what I thought it would look sort of like in Dreadnought. Would the Royal Navy build a York-class equivalent, maybe with 3 9.9.2-inch guns? I doubt it in this scenario, because again, there's going to be not much... The British are going to be in a scenario where they're going to have a baseline force of older ones, and they're going to be able to replace them when they want to, because they're going to be considered kind of like the experimental carriers in the scenario. So basically, the British don't need to build the cheaper ones, because they just keep the older ones going for a bit longer. That they can replace them at will. They're going to be... It's cheaper to keep them going than build a new one, sort of thing. So I don't think a York class equivalent gets built. Lions, you know, on the unanniversary duel. No, the stuff which is mostly which because we had, I would say that you're going to get the full discussion, but the time we spent talking with each other was roughly 4 hours. It included stuff us talking about ship shape and all sorts of things we're planning for the future. And so no, that wasn't recorded. But the roughly recorded video is roughly 2 hours 40-ish minutes. So that's it, you know. Yeah. So basically, you're going to get the discussion, the full discussion that was on the topic. The the wider ranging, and it is, the trouble is we started off by having a bit of a giggle session first, so I'm quite giggly in it because we'd been talking some random things about Admiral Beatty, etc. earlier at the beginning, so we both were having a bit too much fun in it. The most fun you can have sober discussing future naval history, but you know, all those things. Landmaster, what kind of armor and torpedo protection could we see in these modern frigates? Mine had, if I remember correctly, this design, which I put together, which has 6 guns, but the reason I had 6 guns is that was the most I could fit on within the weight allowance, and it had it had a 7-inch armored belt and a 4.5-inch armored deck. So it was a fairly tough cookie. Plus a second internal armored deck, and twin hulled design, full anti-flood for, you know, UAD, those sort of things. And it was limited to 12,500 tons. So I got all that on a 12,500 ton ship. Imagine what you could get on an 18,000 ton ship. Definitely talking at least 9 guns. And yeah, probably triple hull and all those things. Oh, you'll enjoy that night Iron production. You will enjoy that. How much Iron Brew was consumed during the discussion between you and Drac? Don't go there. That was a lot. That was a lot. But I have promised someone something, and it is now 9. It is now 3 hours we've been live. So I said I will be on on Discord in about 11 o'clock, let's say, and I'll be on there for about an hour to chat with people if anyone has any questions. Thank you very much for joining me. Sorry, I'm gonna be going off quickly, but someone is either demanding more things which are gonna make him tubby or a wander. So wander it's going to be. Thank you, everyone. So thank you, Runon. Thank you, Knight6831. Thank you, Carmen Gasberg. Thank you, Steve Clarke. Thank you, Black Maximus. Thank you, Inter Morrisons. Leslie Mitchell, the Information Mimic. Thank you, Paul Amos. Thank you, Jack Ray. Thank you, Thomas Guhua. Thank you, Prince of Toga. Thank you, Carmen Gasberg, Black Maximus, Lyons, De Brock, Colin Cameron, Michael Cooch. Thank you, John Shea, Leslie Mitchell, Steve Clarke, everyone who's been here. Stafford Thompson, of course. Hanny McPhee, thank you. Thank you, everyone who's been here mucking around and chatting in the chat. It's always fun to have people. Dave Harrison, thank you. Peter Dawson, thank you, everyone, for joining me this evening. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it interesting. And hope you're looking forward to next week's one, which should have been programmed and set up. And is, if I click through this, will be up here, is what if Japan pulls out of China in August 1941? That should be next week's one. And then I've got some programmed in. And these two, the Carl Hanshaw one and the Michael 66 one, are going to be premieres. They're going to go out on a Wednesday during the month. So hope you enjoyed them. Thank you very much, Sharon. Take care and have fun. Toodles.